Hello everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, November 3rd, and I hope you're all having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong News Recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we will head over to Allen, where he will sit down with Rick McElroy, Principal Cybersecurity Strategist at VMware, where Rick will speak to the various ways cyber attacks are evolving and how to combat them. Allen will then speak to Gary Lafever, co-CEO and general counsel at Ananos, to talk about how Ananos has raised $50 million in new growth financing to deliver data privacy technology with 100% accuracy and utility to data-driven enterprises. Then we go to Open Source Summit Europe, where Mike Vizard met with Daniela Barbosa, General Manager for the Hyperledger Foundation, where Daniela explained why the time for open source private blockchain platforms has arrived. Then we go to BMC Exchange VIP, where Mike spoke with BMC CTO Ram Chakravarti, where Ram explained how organizations can keep up with the pace of IT innovation. We're then joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on to tell us more about some of our upcoming webinars. Next up, we are premiering episode 3 of our series, Engineering the Change. This series will follow the 3 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship Program as they tackle a 10-week intensive coding bootcamp and prepare themselves for careers in software engineering. After that, we go to Mike Rothman, where he speaks with Ganesh Pai, founder and CEO of Uptix, as they discuss innovative ways to capture telemetry from endpoints all the way to cloud platforms and the role of streaming analytics as it has in improving security detection. We will then wrap up this broadcast with 3 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike interviews Craig Box, Vice President of Open Source and Community for Armo, where Craig explains how an open source Kubernetes project is advancing Kubernetes cybersecurity. Next, Mike interviews Scott Trevino, Senior Vice President of Cybersecurity for TriMedics, where Scott explains why the connected hospital has become such a tempting threat for cybercriminals. Finally, Mike will interview Sean Isom, Engineering Manager for Adobe, where Sean explains what types of applications currently lend themselves to being built using WebAssembly. And that's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy. Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for November 3rd. First up, the EU's Digital Markets Act, or DMA, came into force earlier this week, starting a 6-month-long implementation phase. The DMA seeks to end the unfair practices by big tech companies and help startups innovate and compete with them. Essentially, the DMA provides a list of do's and don'ts, such as banning platforms from ranking their own products higher and preventing pre-installed software on phones and computers. The DMA seeks to profoundly change the digital landscape, but has seen much pushback from big tech. The implementation phase will end on May 2nd of next year, before the act is completely rolled out. Next, Toyota has announced its profits dropped 31% in the most recent quarter. What is to blame, you might ask? Computer chips. Toyota cited the shortage of computer chips as the #1 factor in decline in profits. Toyota has also said the company faces many other problems, such as rising interest rates, high material costs, and the ever-changing exchange rates. However, this isn't just Toyota's problem. The whole auto industry has been hurt by supply chain crunches from the pandemic lockdowns. In other news, Mozilla is finally joining the likes of Google, Microsoft, and Salesforce as it launches a venture capital fund. Mozilla recently announced Mozilla Ventures, a $35 million VC fund targeted at early-stage startups, specifically Series A stage startups. Mozilla has also stated it is looking for responsible companies that will push the tech industry in the right direction. While the VC fund is new, Mozilla has shown dedication towards responsible companies in the past, as it has invested in nearly over 20 companies in the past decade, and with this new fund, it plans to invest in many more. Next up, after a 12-hour public hearing, a Northern Virginia county has approved plans to build multiple data centers. The county voted 5-2 against opposition from environmentalists and conservationists. Zooming out, the number of data centers, which help provide the cloud computing, have grown dramatically in Northern Virginia. And while they can provide a huge revenue boost to local governments, they come with their downsides. Most importantly, environmental ones, such as the incredibly large amounts of electricity that is required to power these data centers, which shows the interesting dichotomy between technology and conserving the environment. On Container Journal, we have an article looking at what you need to learn to become a cloud-native architect. The article looks at the skills needed, how it is different from a developer role, and how architecting for cloud-native applications is different. To learn more, go to containerjournal.com. On Security Boulevard, we have an article looking at the recent GitHub vulnerability that lets attackers take control of a repository and infect all of the applications and code. Using this GitHub flaw, the article takes a look into the risks of open source and repo jacking. To learn more, go to securityboulevard.com. Finally, on Digital CXO, we have an article on how the University of Florida is using AI to boost the agricultural sector. Over the past year, the University of Florida has rapidly expanded its AI initiative and recently announced plans to build an AI hub at the Gulf Coast Research and Education Center to help solve agricultural problems using AI. To learn more, go to digitalcxo.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. Our next guest today is Rick McElroy. Rick is with VMware. It's the first time he's been on Techstrong TV, so let's give him a welcome. Hey, Rick, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you on. So, Rick, why don't we give folks maybe what do you do at VMware and a little bit of your background?
Yeah, look, principal cybersecurity strategist for VMware Carbon Black. Publicly, I think you can think of me as the translation layer for what we're doing for security. And then internally with our customers and prospects, I really work as a trusted advisor to help them ensure what they're doing from a security operations perspective. And yeah, I've been in InfoSec for 25 years and I love it. And you'll often see me at Black Hat, RSA, or any of the major conferences out there.
Us too. Me too. So, Rick, you mentioned, I think you called it VMware Carbon Black. So, obviously, Carbon Black was an acquisition by VMware. I'm going to guess it was, what, two and a half years ago?
Yeah, spot on.
And I think most of our audience knows VMware. Look, they pioneered the hypervisor, and Tanzu is a big offering, but there's many tentacles, if you will, many facets of VMware. Carbon Black being one of them. I would venture most of our audience knows Carbon Black from before VMware even acquired them. But for those who aren't, maybe they don't know Carbon Black, they're not up to date on where VMware is in market today. Would you mind kind of just doing a little level set?
Sure. Carbon Black, we work at the endpoint, right? So cloud workloads, endpoint security, everything from application control to endpoint detection and response. We sort of pioneered that market, right? And I think as part of the acquisition with VMware, where are we going strategically from a virtualization perspective? I think it becomes keenly interesting the amount of data that a digital infrastructure can actually produce. And then, of course, that data can be brought to bear on the security problems, right? So having things like full inspection into hypervisor traffic, being able to correlate traffic from both the application and the process level all the way over to the network level put that context together, and then actually have higher confidence in what we're doing from a security operations perspective. So that's really, I think, what we're working on inside of VMware.
Excellent. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, let's dive into what you and I wanted to talk about today. And that is, you mentioned endpoint detection and response, right? The bad guys, they're just, they're not dumb, right? They're like, deceptively like Mr. Evil, Dr. Evil, right? They're always coming up with crazy new stuff. And we've seen kind of a raft of new attack vectors, of new kinds of technology that they're using to hack in, whether it be to deliver a ransomware payload or something else. One of the kind of new kind of frontiers in this is the so-called deep fakes. Why don't you, again, our audience might have heard of it, they might not, they may think they know what it is. What are we talking about here, Rick?
Yeah, so deep fakes, right? Essentially the ability to create synthetic humans. And there's two manifestations of that. I think the one most people are familiar with is the video version. So things like Tom Cruise that isn't Tom Cruise and Joe Rogan kind of put together, right? Or a fake Nancy Pelosi video that was put out. And so generally speaking, these deepfakes have been associated with external influence campaigns. So the ability to manipulate a mass group of people into doing something in the physical world, right? Well, we know that most people can detect those. The technology up until very recently was a little rudimentary. You have to throw a whole lot of compute and GPUs at it, right? Because you're rendering this video content based on other videos and pictures and all of that stuff. But it's gotten a lot cheaper. And so what we've seen the adversaries do over the last 2 years is start to pivot from external influence campaigns to actually manipulating humans via deepfake audio, right, to perform things like wire transfers and frauds, or video to do things like onboard and get jobs and actually receive a paycheck and benefits from organizations, which the FBI put an alert out in June around. So I think over the next year, you're going to see this expand into healthcare. Certainly, I think with the omnipresence of telehealth, I think you're going to start to see medical fraud pivot towards deepfakes as well.
Insidious little bastards, huh? In my mind, Rick, when I look at it, there's a couple of different categories of this. One, I think, is the one you said right in the beginning, which is kind of, let's call it the traditional deep fake. I purport to be a picture of President Biden stumbling down the stairs because I'm old or feeble, and I'm nothing against Biden at all, but that's we use that for political gain. But it could be used for much more insidious stuff than that. But it's really, so what we're really doing is making a fake of a known person, and whether that's a political or public figure to use externally, or a private figure to use internally in a company, you're impersonating a known person. Another aspect of deep fake is just making up fake people, generating random humans so that I can get a social security card, I can get a Facebook account, I can, get a job and get maybe tax returns or whatever, what it is. So we're not impersonating a known person. We're actually making up a fictitious person and giving them an identity and everything else to use, for nefarious purposes usually. That's yet a different aspect of this deep fake stuff. My fear is that we're just scratching the surface, though.
I think we are just scratching the surface. Obviously, we have our own observations. Those observations are based on our incident responders. So folks that deploy our technology after a compromise and a breach in over 500 engagements a year, or whether that's the telemetry that we actually collect, right? Which is petabytes of data that's ingested into our threat intelligence cloud and fused together, right? So I think every vendor has a partial view into this problem, right? But as we're starting to compare notes, as we're starting to look at other people's things, I do think as it relates to the future of humans and our interaction online. Specifically, as we start to move towards a virtual reality and an augmented reality world, humans are going to have to get better about discerning this because there is no real technical solution to this today. So I think Facebook and Google have attempted to make a run at detecting that on their platform. However, that's generally going to be for external use, right? It's not going to be your CEO calling the CFO on the phone and asking for that wire transfer to go out, creating that sense of urgency. And oh, by the way, it sounds exactly like your CEO. And so I think for humans, there's a couple of things we can do. One thing for organizations, start to talk to your IT teams and your legal and finance teams today. They're the ones that are currently being targeted because they have access to money and to be able to do password resets and give out credentials and all of those things, right? And then come up with some very rudimentary ways to break this chain from the attackers. So as an example, Alan, if you were my CEO and I was your CFO, we could have our own challenge passphrase that we use and only the two of us know. So that if you call me to perform a wire transfer, I would expect to hear that language, right? And maybe we rotate that and we get a little fancier. But I think two-person integrity rule still applies when it comes to, transferring money out of an organization.
You know what? I remember a Star Trek original series episode like that. Scotty needed the password from Captain Kirk before he would take down the phaser alert or something. It's real. I think that's an excellent idea. I mean, we're a little nothing company here, and we've already seen it where, some of our folks have gotten text messages that purport to be from me saying, hey, I need you to do me a favor. I need a gift card to give someone, or, little stupid scams like that. But they would be so much more powerful and effective if it was an audio message instead of a text message and they heard my voice.
And then the ones that work fairly well are actually voicemails. Yeah. So because it goes through two systems, you have an identifier on your phone that says Alan called, right? He called me. And then I have a voicemail from Alan. Well, my phone is telling me.
Sounds good, right? Who's going to question it? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's scary stuff, man. Scary stuff. And here's the other thing that I think is scary too, is, this is a typical security scenario where we're going to catch up, but we're almost, by definition, going to be one step behind these folks because the technology continues to improve, right? And if we've got to put in catchphrases or something, we're back to passwords. Oh, what was the word I was using with Rick, right? I don't remember because I have a different word with Tom and a different word with Dick and a different word with Harry. And, that I don't know how scalable that is my problem.
Yeah, so that's a very fair point, right? And I do think, the vendor community will have to innovate in this space again, especially as we get towards, virtual reality and augmented reality. And so this idea, and if you look over our past threat reports, right, we've been talking about one particular theme in different manifestations, and the theme is manipulating reality. So if you go back a couple of years, you'll see we talked a lot about what these attackers and cyber criminals were doing inside of the environment to bend reality, messing with time, messing with logs, messing with data, right? Because what they want to do is hide, and they want to change your digital reality, right? Same thing for the humans, right? They're digitally trying to manipulate these humans. And so I think we as humans need to understand that this whole internet is a bad neighborhood, and there's a whole lot of people trying to scam us. And so I think we've got to come up with some better mechanisms to verify each other as a human entity and not as a synthetic entity. And then secondarily, you brought up a really good point earlier about these synthetic personas that are created. Well, look, I can go buy those on the dark web. And in fact, some of these personas make posts on gardening sites, right? So they have a whole digital background that comes with them that becomes very
it's an
hard.
identity. Yeah.
And it's been years, and it's been running for years, and posting on Instagram and Facebook and all of these things. And so, yeah, that being able to discern that synthetic content from an actual human is becoming tougher and tougher as the days go on.
I'm just listening to you talk about this and cringing. Because, look, there's your garden variety cyber thief who's doing this for financial gain. There's your hacktivist who, are doing it and then there's your nation state actors who are looking to manipulate public opinion or, influence things or break into things, right? The list goes on and on. It's some scary stuff. Quite honestly, right? I've been in security a long time, and I always feel confident the good guys will win. We'll figure out some technology that, makes this not so easy. I just, as I sit here today, I don't see that technology, right? I don't feel confident in, where's that going to come from, right?
Well, yeah, usually, and it's sad, and I think just it speaks to human nature, right? We usually have to wait for the losses to pile up before we'll make an investment. And so I think, given what the FBI said, I think given what we're looking at and talking to people about and the pure volume that this is starting to be executed in, I would assume that you'll start to see some investment go into this space. But frankly speaking, Alan, while deepfakes are very sexy, fancy, I do think it's the future of fraud and scams as it relates to the internet. Basic things work all the time from the cyber criminals. Getting into someone's inbox and phishing them and then running Mimikatz to get their credentials. Those are all things that happen all the time and
every day.
And the orgs haven't stopped them, right? So I think, but look, there is some good news on the defender side because I get to talk to a lot of them. We ask specifically about things that are working on our side. And I think if you look globally, there is a hot war that's occurring right now. We all know warfare is preceded and concurrently run with cyber warfare to take down infrastructure and interrupt the supply chain to do all of these things. I would say overall, the West has done a fairly good job defending against some of the most advanced attacks on the planet. And so I think
absolutely,
I think that gives me hope, right? It gives me hope that those lessons are being applied to other NATO countries. Those lessons are being pulled back into vendor technology. The threat intelligence is being shared. But now we have to specifically start to look at this new manifestation of manipulation, right?
Yeah. To me, look, and you're right, by the way, considering that there's a war going on in Eastern Europe, and it's almost Cold War-esque, Cold War-like in its, Russia versus the West kind of thing. The fact that we haven't heard of more cyber attacks related to that, not that there haven't been attempts, is probably, better than we could have hoped for. I think the real issue is, everyone today talks about metaverse. You called it virtual reality, augmented reality. If one were to believe what Zuckerberg and the Facebook guys and these guys talk about, this whole metaverse thing is going to explode. And that's just fraught for fakes, in my mind, right? Because, you're in an abstract reality. It's just obviously a place where that's going to be. But I would hope that you can build sort of an on-ramp that would verify, your humanity, if you will. Though the whole idea of having to verify humanity to go to a inhuman a not-human environment, artificial environment is crazy anyway. But I do think that's where we're really going to see this, rubber meet the road, and we're going to have something in there.
I do think conversations are leaning that way, but I also think there's a massive privacy discussion that should occur concurrently with that, and I think that'll be a real interesting one to see where we land. But yesterday,
what's that?
Yesterday I heard folks discussing on a podcast this idea of your social security number being associated with your web identity. Right, so like a digital identity. What a
friggin' idea that is.
Well, and then I went, that's a bad idea. And then then again, there's some, I think, privacy concerns as well. That being said, I think organizations and companies, certainly if you're producing something like a metaverse arena, you would probably verify identities very close to the way Ticketmaster does today, and make sure you have ticketing and all of that stuff.
No, but my point on that, Rick, is this, though. It's an interesting, ironic kind of thing. You speak to a lot of young folks today, and I'm not saying it just because, I've been around the block a bit, but the concept of privacy online with them is not as strong as maybe it is to you or to me, right? They know that everything's online, and when they put it online, their assumption is if it's online, people are going to see it. Whatever kind of corral you try to put around your info. But yet, the idea of someone impersonating them pisses them off to no end, right? But the connection between, hey, when you don't value your privacy, right? And you put your privacy to the side for the sake of greater visibility or whatever online, this is a consequence of that. That, I don't know if they're making that connection, right?
It's interesting. I do speak with tons of them. I think their definition of privacy is different. So I do think you're right. They generally expect that their data online is sniffed, looked at, gathered,
and not just by bad guys. Google, Facebook, Twitter, the government, everyone else, right?
But if you, I think, more tactically ask them to open their phone and their messages and show their parents, as an example, or show a teacher, they do care about privacy, right?
Then they get
so it's just. Yeah, our intrinsic definition is I don't want people snooping on any of my stuff. I don't want snooped on, right? I'm a big privacy advocate. That being said, I actually understand the kids' mentality because they're kind of born into that world where they didn't get a choice about it. And it looks like the unwinding of that is going to take a long time. And so I think if we as professionals can talk to them in a way that makes sense and draw that line, because they just don't understand the intrinsic risks of governments across the globe gathering all of this data and being able to manipulate them.
Absolutely. Hey, man, we're about out of time. Rick, for people who want to get more information about VMware Carbon Black, security and stuff, is it still carbonblack.com or is it?
Yeah, it'll still route. So you can go over to VMware.com, carbonblack.com. You can find me at InfoSecRick on Twitter, LinkedIn, and also my team, the Howlers. So follow us, and we're always out there trying to teach people some better stuff to get some better outcomes.
We're always looking for hints and to help the audience. Come back and tell us more, Rick, soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Rick McElroy, VMware Carbon Black here on Techstrong TV. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Techstrong TV. I'm really happy. I've got it's new to our audience. They're actually a fairly new company just coming out of stealth to introduce you to, and who better to introduce you to the company than their founder, CEO. I'd like you to say hello to Gary Lefevre. Gary's never been on Techstrong. Gary, welcome. It's our pleasure to have you on. So Gary, before we even get into the company, let's talk about Gary because, I think we were talking off camera, sort of a similar path in many ways. Let's hear a little bit about the Gary Lefevre story.
Absolutely. We had a great conversation before the interview started. It's really about the intersection of law and technology. And rather than viewing them as foreign nations one to another, the fact that when they can actually cooperate and accomplish new things, what is made possible. Years, if not decades ago, it used to be content was king. Now it's data is king, very often driven by the need for more real-time insight and actionability as a result of COVID. And so I was a partner before at Hogan Lovells. I was also a engineer and data engineer and data scientist at Accenture. And those two have joined. But for the last 20 years, I've been working with my co-founder, Ted Meyerson, at this intersection, bringing solutions to the table that join these two. So our prior company, which we sold to NASDAQ OMX in 2010, helped to re-link data that appeared unrelated And the result of that is reduced risk in the financial markets. NASDAQ OMX bought our company. They put in over 100 financial markets around the globe. And it's that awareness of both law and technology that caused us to found Ananos 10 years ago.
Fantastic. So Ananos was founded 10 years ago, and that is the 10-year overnight success
that we're going to be talking about today, right?
Yes, yeah.
It's crazy. But you're right. You know what, Gary? Before we jump into Ananos, when we talk about the intersection of law and technology without law, it's kind of like people tell me, just let the market forces have at it, right? Let capitalism be capitalism. Well, without some breaks, without some common sense, very quickly you wind up, with the rich getting richer, the poor. That's kind of where we are. The rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, and the rich crushing it, right? And you wind up with robber barons and stuff like that. You need, there's always sort of a counterweight. There's always there needs to be balance in life and the force and everything else. It's kind of that way with technology and law. In many ways, law provides the boundaries, the guardrails for our technology. I think one of the biggest problems we have in society today is, quite frankly, like you hear, Elon Musk is buying Twitter and he's going to let everyone say whatever they want. It's freedom of speech. Our law and, kind of legal system has not caught up to our technology in social media and these kinds of things. And so there's this disconnect right now, and that's why we have, I think, a lot of the issues that we have in not only in our country, but in the world today. And it's getting worse with deep fakes and the metaverse and all this. Anyway, it's important that law and technology work together. Let's hear about your company and how it's helping with data and so forth.
Sure. Before I do that, I want to touch upon what you just said, Alan, because I totally agree. And the way I look at it is it's about sustainability, right? Mm-hmm. So the robber barons can win for a while, but ultimately, who is it that's buying their services, using their products? It's the masses. And if they feel downtrodden, there will be an uprising. And so the reality is sustainability, which is oftentimes influenced and helped by law, okay, but law is not a golden shield or silver bullet, is to ensure that there's a balance. And it's that balance of things. And even just very quickly, if you look at how even laws take different approaches, and I'm going to stereotype here and generalize, but we only have 15 minutes, right? The U.S. laws related to privacy, while they're very responsive and respectful of privacy and individual rights, they have an inclination and orientation to commercial success. And it's hard to argue with the commercial success that the U.S. has had. Compare that to Europe, which has seen a lot more atrocities at the individual level with the different world wars, et cetera. And there, they have more of a focus on fundamental human rights. And even between those two legal systems, the US approach and the EU approach, you have tensions. And it's this intersection of law and technology that can reconcile those tensions. And so that's what we set out to do with the Nanos. I mentioned earlier, our prior company, F10, relinked data that appeared unrelated, and in doing so, improved systemic risk in the financial markets. I don't know if you remember back in 2008, there was the flash crash where trillions of dollars were sucked out of the US financial markets in minutes because there were not controls. Those are the controls, right? Remember? I mean, it was scary. It was like, oh my gosh, what can happen? Yeah. Those were the kinds of controls that our prior company made possible in real time. And so when we sold to NASDAQ OMX, we were there for a couple of years and we realized, oh my gosh, there's a bigger opportunity here. Where F10 relinked data that appeared unrelated, what if we could delink data that was clearly related, and in doing so, selectively and controllably determine when it's revealed for what purpose by whom? Had never been done before. That's why this is a 10-year overnight success, okay? We actually did a lot of research and development, whether what we were talking about was even possible, and realized there was a lot of controls to protect data when at rest, encryption, when in transit, encryption. But when you're actually making use of the data, all the linkages, all the identities, all the correlations and interrelationships are evident. But you know what? You don't need to see all of those for every purpose. So could you selectively reveal? That's what Anano set out to do. That's what we've done. We have a very broad IP patent portfolio. We have 26 granted international patents with another 70 plus data assets. But more importantly, our clients and everything from pharma to banking, et cetera, have proven that this enables them to make greater use of the data, okay, in a sustainable long-term manner, because it's not violating the rights of their customers. And more importantly, well, as importantly, it's not exposing them to liability with their contractual partners or lawyers or regulators or enforcers.
Got it. I mean, well, you just said it right there. You know what, Gary, I'd like to dive a little deeper, peel some onions first, peel layers off the onion. But before we do that, I should mention, look, recent funding announcement
for the company. I think the PR people would be upset if we didn't mention it. Why don't you tell the audience, share a little bit?
We're very excited and proud of this financing because it's a true reflection of what makes Ananos different. These are uncertain times for many reasons, and it's certainly a difficult time to get financing for any company. But this is actually a debt structure. And this debt structure is based on the value of our IP portfolio. And this is a debt structure that actually has been used in the past for medical device companies or other type of developments in the life science medical community, where you spend years creating a asset portfolio, patents, copyrights, et cetera. And based on that asset portfolio, you can get a loan, literally a loan. So our IP assets were valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. And using those as collateral, we have $50 million in brand new debt financing that we are using to make the world aware of the 10-year overnight success that is Ananos. Aon was the coordinator of that. And basically what happens is they get insurance policies. They get leading global insurance companies that write PCI insurance policies against the value of our assets. And then Ghost Tree was the actual lender. So it's a very unique situation, but I would highly encourage it for any company that has a valuable IP asset portfolio.
And of course, you don't give up equity.
Correct.
Or do you?
Non-dilutive.
Warrants or something, right?
Yeah, very minor, non-dilutive. So we were very excited about it and would recommend for those companies that have an well-established IP portfolio to check it out.
Absolutely. It's a great way of looking at it. All right. We got that out of the way. We made those folks happy. Let's jump back in. Let's jump back into Ananos. And, look, our audience tends to be fairly technical, right? Gary, how is this helping, affecting, changing? How where does this play in their lives?
Yeah, so my guess is you may have sub-communities within your audience. You have the DevOps or the security, and then you also have the data users and innovation, right? And those two are groups that oftentimes see each other at odds, right? Because the data innovators, the CDOs, the chief innovation officers, they're tasked with using that data to drive value. Now, that can oftentimes be revenue immediately, and in other situations could be longer term values, such as life science research, looking for medical breakthroughs, but they're looking to use the data, right? Whereas if you look at the DevOps and the security guys, sometimes they're more concerned about ensuring that there's no downside, that the data is not lost. Well, that's great. I could lock up the data. I'm totally secure. I get no value. The tension is what happens when you're actually using the data, right? Encryption does not help when you use data. And I love it when people bring up homomorphic encryption, because I love science fiction as well, right? Homomorphic encryption will always be at a fraction of the speed and relative value of other data simply because of the processing requirements. It's not ready for prime time. So in essence, realistically, encryption is not an answer. And perimeter controls are not an answer. because I want to make use of the data outside of the environment, right? So it's this tension. So what I would say to your technical audience of all different categories, what is your answer when you want protections that flow with the data wherever it goes? Outside of your organization, outside of your country, and when intercepted by parties that it wasn't intended for. That's what Ananos does. It protects data in a way that the protections flow wherever the data goes. You don't have to control the environment. You have inserted the protections into the data. And a way to look at it from a technological perspective is a digital twin, very highly recognized way of a digital representation of a person, place, or thing. What we create is a protected version of the digital twin that we call a variant twin. And that variant twin is use case specific, and it has all the controls built into it. So wherever it goes, you have assurance it's protected.
Love it. That hit it. I think you nailed it right there. You know, we were talking off camera. For a long time, it seemed like we took our eye off the prize when it comes to data, right? We were very AppSec, became the most important part of security, right? Securing our applications, securing our infrastructure, securing our endpoints. And we lost sight of, or as I say, we took our eye off the ball, that data is the crown jewels. That data is king. And securing that data is job number one, right? It has to be. Well, you want to say it's 1 and 1A with making sure that data is not fungible. It's not leaking. I don't mean from a security point of view, but I mean more from, hey, we didn't back up the data and the computer died or something. You know what I mean? But preserving and securing that data, and then analyzing and making use of that data, right? That's the lifeblood of companies. It's not how many applications they develop. It's not what cloud provider they're on. It's about what's in that data and making sure that data remains useful and secure and everything else. So, this is such a timely type of message for our audience out there.
Alan, what's interesting, everything you just said is absolutely correct. The question I have for your audience is when they hear the phrase securing data, do they actually extend that term to while in use?
So no, because I'm going to tell you something. We're a little pittance of a company here, right? We've been getting a lot from our bigger public sponsors, the third-party compliance tests and around security and so forth. And they ask us about data security. And there's two questions they ask. Do you encrypt data in storage? Do you encrypt data in transit? That's it.
Right.
Not while it's in use or
while it's in use.
To them, use means in transit, but that's not really in use. That's just moving it from one place to another. So no, I don't think most people are they lost sight of that. It's a shame.
Yeah, and it's something we need to do.
What's interesting, and if I'm not insulting you, I'm going to say we're both of a rough age. When we remember the conversion from analog to digital, and the conversion from analog to digital, initially the value proposition was efficiency. You could do things fast, right? It was amazing. I mean, I programmed on punch cards. Okay, I go way back, right?
Me too.
Okay, right. Nothing like dropping your punch cards on the way to the computer center.
Do you remember those days? Especially, that was me.
Yeah, absolutely. But what happened, and people didn't really take note of it, is the conversion from analog to digital was efficiency for the same process. But the real power of data is when you go beyond the initial process and you repurpose the data for subsequent processing, secondary processing. That's when it gets really powerful. And that's when it gets really dangerous. So I believe that the reason people don't associate the term securing data with use is because the data use used to be within an enclosed environment or enclave. You didn't have to worry about it, right? There were cinder block walls, there was security fences. And what's happened now is data's value actually comes from its flow, from its integration, sharing, combination elsewhere. And so what was regarded and almost subconsciously counted on, which was security in use, was confined processing. So if I protect it in transit, if I protect it when it's at rest, and I limit where it's processed, I'm okay. That's what's changed. Data is all about use and sharing and combining and flows now. And that's why we believe Ananos and its variant twins has such an opportunity, because it secures data when in use, no matter where it flows.
Great. Hey, Gary, we're probably over time, but we got to let people know. If they want to find out more about Ananos, if they want to take a look at it, put their hands on it, what's the best way to engage here?
Go to ananos.com, ANONOS.com, and there's high level information, and you can double, triple click and go as deep as you want. And we look forward to the discussions.
Are there free trials?
Proof of concepts.
We have a proof of value, and this you will not find anywhere else in the industry. And it's a good thing you asked this question, because I would have gotten in trouble with our PR people. Not only do we protect data when in use, secure the data when in use, but we will guarantee that the accuracy you get from processing our secured part of data in use is 100%. 100% accuracy and relevancy as if you had processed unprotected clear text. So if you engage in a POV with Ananos, and at the end of that POV, it is not clear that the software is capable of generating the same accuracy as unprotected clear text, we give you your money back.
Fantastic. I just want to make sure I got it right. You called it a variant twin,
twin. Correct. It's a use case specific variation of the digital twin. And I want to raise, while a lot of people pay attention to our software and our capabilities because of personal data and privacy, a digital twin can be of a person, place, or thing. And therefore, the variant twin can also help to safeguard trade secrets. We're working with one of the leading new digital cities about how they can make use of it. And so it helps to protect data for any use of any kind, anywhere, in a manner that the controls are embedded in the data and flow wherever it's processed.
Excellent. Gary, we're out of time. Our next guests are in studio here. Hey, man, it was a pleasure meeting you.
Truly was.
Best of luck with Ananos.
Don't disappear for 10 years on me. Come back.
Keep us posted.
We're going to be doing a lot of stuff around data. I mentioned to you, we'd love to have you
involved.
Yep. Fantastic. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Right.
Hey, Gary Lefevre from Ananos. Go check it out. We're going to take a break on Techstrong. We'll be right back.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, we're back at the Open Source Summit in Dublin. This one's for Europe compared to North America, but we're also here talking to Daniela Barbosa, who's the executive director of the Hyperledger Foundation, and they had their own event here a couple of days ago, so we're going to be talking about all things related to blockchain. Daniela, welcome.
Welcome. It's great to be here.
I'm not sure that a lot of people know exactly what Hyperledger is, so maybe you want to describe that a little bit, because there's blockchain like Ethereum and that's more public, and that tends to get all the noise in the headlines, but it seems like enterprises are starting to line up more on a private blockchain.
No, well, actually, enterprises are in the continuum of public and private today. Maybe in 2016 or 2017, enterprises were very focused on permissioned, private, distributed ledger frameworks. And there's big deployments of those against trade finance and healthcare and supply chain. Today, I think there's an actual continuum of companies that are very interested in public blockchain and the different layer ones, for example, that are out there in the different use cases. And here at Hyperledger Foundation, and we also had our member summit, so we had two events for the price of one. We had our members and our community really talking about true and proven technologies like Hyperledger Fabric that's been around since 2016 and deployed in most enterprise permissioned networks, but also in exciting new projects like Hyperledger Besu, which is an Ethereum client, number 3 on the Ethereum execution client list. 1 is Geth, 2 is Ergon, 3 is Besu. So we are really comprehensive of where the market and the enterprise is going with distributed ledger technologies and related tech as well, and identity, for example, and more.
Is it your sense that most of these projects are moving from the pilot stage, or are they still in pilot, or are they starting to show up more in production environments?
It varies by industry. It varies by use case. So, unfortunately, there's still a lot of people thinking that, blockchain is an answer to a problem that they don't have. So those, projects might start as a pilot and maybe don't go anywhere. But what we see enterprises, we see executives talking about the efficiency gains that they're seeing, the ROI gains that they're seeing within the implementations. It's not sexy, right? The media doesn't want to talk about it because it doesn't have some guy on the top talking about, cryptocurrencies, and there's lots of great stories. And very often, you've been in the enterprise software space forever, right? Couple of things. One is you don't get the opportunity to talk about it because your corp comms people don't really want to talk about it. And if there's a word that is shaky or is a little bit scary in the marketplace like blockchain, most likely you don't want to talk about that, right? And you're building consortiums with hundreds sometimes of partners in these communities. So you have to have agreement from everybody to be able to talk about what you're building in these blockchain networks. The other thing is people are still worried about, I say this all the time, you go on a website, right, and you don't say, hey, this was built with a database, an SQL database, isn't this website amazing? You just use that website. You don't know what's powering it, right? We had Saudi Aramco talk about their use case in invoicing. They have onboarded 11 vendors since March of 2021. Now, these are vendors that they're spending a lot of money with, right? It's Saudi Aramco. They are seeing efficiency gains. They're seeing their customers or their vendors using the application. But they don't talk about blockchain. They don't go to their vendors and say, hey, you got to onboard into our invoice portal because it's blockchain. No, they say, hey, we just built something that's more efficient, that allows us to reconcile invoices much quicker, and allows you to get money faster. Would you like to participate? Right. And that's what people are missing, I think, in the story.
Are these brand new use cases, or are they in some instances replacing, say, a traditional SAP ledger that they were using for some purpose one way or the other, but this wound up being a little more efficient because it's more distributed?
Yeah, I think the processes are the same. There are new businesses being built on top of blockchain networks for sure, right? But these, the example I just gave you, there are existing businesses. They had to pay their vendors before they implemented this new, this new platform for them. So I think it's a combination of both.
All right. Will we consume it, to your description before about it's a database and I'm just using it, is that going to be consumed more as a service provided by somebody in the cloud versus something that I build myself and deploy? Because most of the folks that I talk to who are deploying it, they have major IT squads, so it's not really something for, the mid-market just yet, but maybe it will be as a service.
Yeah, so first I want to clarify my description of the database. I'll change that story and say, when you go to a website and you don't think, hey, this great experience is JavaScript, as a user you don't know. So that's what I meant, not that blockchain is a database, but we all know that. So to answer your question, yes, we need, networks will need to provide nodes as a service for a couple of things. One reason is there are certainly just some companies that are not large enough. They don't have IT departments that can run their own infrastructure, that can run their own node. So we're seeing companies like, for example, AWS that has blockchain as a service, and they're offering managed services on top of that. And there's many others. There's small and there's big cloud services providers that do that. So I think there's always going to be a need if you're going to build a distributed network that has multi, participant, small, medium, large. You're going to have to do that.
Mm-hmm. There was also a lot of talk during the conference about digital currencies and using blockchain as the base for that. The EU is experimenting with this. A lot of countries are starting to think about it at least. There's some examples, I think, in Cambodia and some other places where people are doing some interesting things. What is the future of money as we think about it right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great work happening in the Hyperledger Foundation across various projects. Right now, in one of the workshops, the Banque de France, who just joined the Hyperledger Foundation as an associate member, along with the Central Bank of Cambodia, joining the Bank of England, the Boston Fed, the MAS. These are organizations that have developers and IT folks that are actually in the code, developing the code and the processes. So we've been tracking central bank digital currencies for about 18 months, and to see how the adoption of those projects are going. The first retail CBDC was in the Bank of Cambodia, the project Bakan. That was a retail CBDC built with a project called Iroha, Hyperledger Iroha. And they've seen thousands of transactions in peer-to-peer distribution. So I think that we're going to see, it's still early. I think there was a big rush to get things done, and Maya Santamaria, who is the minister from the Minister of Finance here in Ireland, spoke on a panel on CBDCs, and she mentioned, we're very still, early on what it's going to look like. Is it going to need a distributed ledger? Is it going to be something else? But the push is that with Diem coming along, when Facebook made that announcement, all the central banks woke up around the world and said, we need to do that. What's happening in China with the yuan, with the digital yuan, we need to figure out a way, and there's going to be multiple approaches. What works for the Eastern Caribbean Bank is not going to work for the Fed in the US.
It seems there's also a lot of confusion about, well, if I have an immutable platform where all the changes can be seen by everybody, how do I deal with confidentiality? Because a lot of these banks want transactions that are, super, super private. You can imagine the Swiss might be having a conversation about this.
Absolutely.
So, are we going to try to strike a balance between these things, or how will we get there?
Yeah, it's a myth that you can't have privacy of your data if you're participating in a blockchain consortium at all. I'll give you an example. So we have a project here at the Linux Foundation that's called OpenIDL. And OpenIDL is for insurance regulatory reporting to the states in North America. So every state commissioner of the insurance commissioner has a requirement that the insurance carriers report back to them the information around the drivers, who has car insurers, basically. I could tell you that the insurance carriers don't want to tell each other who their customer base is, right? Mm-hmm. But they have a regulatory requirement that's being put into place that they have to do it, and they have to do it in the same format, and they have to be able to look at each other's data to figure out if there's things that shouldn't be doing. So regulatory requirement is making them come together in a consortium to do this, and then blockchain is the way to do it with the privacy architecture, making sure that each carrier and other participants in that network don't see the data that they shouldn't see. You and I are having a transaction. I give you the rights to see the data that I have. That gentleman over there just needs to know that it happened. He doesn't need to know, he just needs to confirm that transaction happened, so then I can go on with my business. So I think it's maybe a myth, or maybe people haven't looked at the architectural documents very closely.
Could be. One of the other issues is we hear a lot about sustainability, especially here in Europe. People want to know where the coffee came from, and they want to know what went into it for producing energy, carbon, all kinds of stuff. Is that going to be a use case for blockchain, because it's going to provide the mechanism by which we will have increased transparency into where things come from.
Absolutely. So I think early on in 2016 and 2017, when the Hyperledger Foundation started talking about use cases, we actually used the coffee use case quite a bit, right? Because it really puts together the farmer, right? The farmer that is looking for a market to bring his coffee into place, and it puts into place the consumer, so the consumer understands where that's going. It also, along the supply chain, all the people that touch that product, and how do you get money to them faster? How do you make sure that if it needs to be tracked back into a specific spot where it got missed or something went wrong with the shipment, all the supply chain, value chain along there. So we've been talking about those use cases for a while, but that also has a lot of climate impact approaches, right? If you think about the EV and the car manufacturing movement, right? EV cars are great, they save oil and gas, but you know what? They're made out of batteries, and those batteries get mined from mines in Africa and other places, and there's slave labor that is sometimes pulling out those mines. How do you do that whole supply chain with accountability across that multi-vendor enterprise view, right? So I think that there's a lot of opportunities in climate accounting. Trust is one, right? You want to trust. There's a lot of greenwashing of data. I planted 1 million trees. That's great. Can you prove it to me that you planted 1 million trees? And then can you also prove that those 1 million trees actually grew up to be a carbon positive for the world, not a negative?
There's also been a lot of fraud over the years and a lot of transactions. So is this a way to kind of get at some of that issue as well? Because, we have instances where people are selling things that aren't really what they say they are, and this becomes a bigger issue. And it can also be healthcare fraud or whatever it is. But if we have this more immutable framework, is that some way that we're going to get after what, frankly, is a multi-trillion-dollar industry?
It's providence, right? And we have the diamond supply chain, right? Another great use case for 5 years. The Kimberly process has been running on Everledger. It's a Hyperledger Fabric implementation. That is a way to track the provenance of the diamond and also the transfer. So if you sold me a diamond, I wouldn't pay you very much for it, but I would take it, and then I have the provenance of where that diamond came and how many people had potential hands. Now, I don't need to know who had all the hands on it, but that there was 5 owners, for example. We're seeing this in wines. We're seeing it in high-value art, obviously with NFTs and kind of the digital signature on these things. I'll give you an example. It's a great experiment. Just this week, they're going to start burning. And when I mean burning, Damien Hirst is an artist. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He painted a very large picture. He cut it up into 10,000 pieces. They sold those 10,000 pieces as NFTs. And everybody that bought one had for a year, they had this NFT. And the NFT was that at the end of the year, they had to make a choice whether they wanted a physical piece of paper or they wanted the digital NFT. And the physical piece of paper will get burned or the NFT will get burned. You need to make a decision at the end of the 1 year. Next week in their gallery, they're going to be burning the decision makers who did the paper version of the art piece. And Damien Hirst is a very, very popular painter, so that piece of paper is worth a lot of money, that art piece. That is built with Hyperledger Besu, which is our Ethereum client. And it allows, from that point also from a sustainability perspective, because you're not running all those transactions on a public proof of work blockchain, it really helps the marketplace as well. So yes on provenance, yes on traceability, and yes on value.
It feels like we're at the cusp of a shift where a lot of people who got involved early were building pilot projects and then trying to figure out what the business use case was. It almost seems like we're going to flip it now, where people are going to understand what the business use cases are, and then there's going to be more people launching projects with the platform because they're going to understand it. It's very hard to build something on the IT side and then hope they will come.
Yeah.
So, are we kind of at this transition point?
Right. Well, I mean, it depends on who you're talking about. If you're talking about enterprises, right, that's going to be the case, right? You see innovation labs pop up all the time. Well, now we have the blockchain innovation labs, or now we have the cloud computing innovation labs, and now we have the AI innovation labs, right? That's how they allow their employees and their structure to go outside of their normal business so that they can innovate, so that they can build new businesses, right? That's just enterprises, and those cycles will continue to go. The proof is in the pudding. You know, when I started at Hyperledger in 2017, we used to get those calls from someone who's like, I just got out of an executive meeting, large company executive meeting, and my C-suite said, you got to do something with blockchain. What do I do? That's just not the right approach, right? It's good if you want to experiment. Well, what's your business like? Oh, you do this. Well, here's 5 use cases that you might want to experiment with. We have companies that run hackathons and have for years where they allow their employees to build solutions and come up with things that solve your business problems. Don't worry about what technology to use, and then bring it into a hackathon, and then we'll pick 2 to 3 to take it into MVP or POC, depending on the structure that it's there. That's the kind of innovation that enterprises need to do, whether it's with blockchain or any other technology that they're looking at, in my opinion.
How do people get involved with you guys, or is there a form I fill out somewhere, or do I just show up and kind of start hanging out with people?
Yeah, well, you know, open source communities are open. All are welcome. We've been here for 3 days, 1 day with just our members, which is an amazing way to understand what their strategy is in the market, and the other 2 days with our global community. We had people coming from all over the world. Our Brazil regional chapter, for example, they were all, a large group of them were here for the last 2 days. Our India regional chapter, Africa, our members from around the world. You can show up at events, and we're so excited to actually have. You can see the last 3 days, I have enough energy for the next 3 months, just being with people as well. We are all welcome. I just had a conversation with a young woman that we do diversity scholarships, and she came from Bolivia for 3 days in Dublin to spend time with the Hyperledger community, and it was the most inspiring thing for me to have sponsored. You know, the Hyperledger Foundation sponsored, and we do quite a few with the support of our sponsors. So those are the kind of things. People just show up. We have, if you go to hyperledger.org and you click on participate, you can see our chats, our community meetings. Pretty much on any day you can jump on a community meeting and you'll be welcomed, and people will share with you what they're working on. We have events, we have meetups, virtual and in person now, that you can participate. Over 80,000 people participate in our Hyperledger meetup community. There's so much ways to get involved. I know it's confusing sometimes because Hyperledger Foundation, we're 15 projects, we have 10 special interest groups, we're hundreds of companies. We really cover hundreds of use cases. So how do you get involved? Just show up, ask the person there, this is what I love, this is what I'm passionate about, how do I get involved? And I hope they will tell you, I know they'll tell you exactly how to get involved.
So get out your little crystal ball. Where are we a year from now?
Where are we from a year from now? I think that we are going to be, the Hyperledger Foundation is going to be a much stronger community. Today, things, digital identity, for example, are topics, decentralized identity. We just launched a new course on self-sovereign identity with partnership with the Linux Foundation training organization. 5 years ago, we launched an enterprise blockchain course, an edX course, a free course. Over 200,000 people have taken that course, and we update it every year. And talk about educating the market. In 2016, 2017, we needed to do that. We needed to have business and technical leaders understand what enterprise blockchain was all about. Yesterday, we just launched SSI's, a self-sovereign identity edX course, same thing, free, really for business and technical users, because essentially, you're going to have to be facing these decisions in your product development. You're going to be having to face these decisions in the partnerships that you have, right? One company always partners and has networks with others. Digital identity is going to be core to things, so I encourage everyone to do that as well. So in the year's time, I hope that we have more companies that are willing to talk about the work that they've done. The last 2 days, you saw a lot of the companies, large brands, talking about the work that they're doing and the results that they're seeing, so we'll see more of that. I also am very, very excited about the conversions of kind of the coming to the middle or the central point of those those that are working on public blockchains and those that have for many, many years actually worked on the distributed ledger technology, the core blockchain principles, right? Public blockchains are blockchains. Everything that we've been working on for the last 7 years is blockchains as well. The community's coming together. So for example, we just had Casper Labs join, we have Hedera, we have Consensus. Ethereum Foundation just did a presentation yesterday around their client incentive program that they awarded to Hyperledger Besu. These are things that are happening. I believe that the Hyperledger Foundation over the last 6 years has got us to this point due to enterprise developers, and I just am so excited about what we'll continue to build.
All right, folks, you heard it here. The future is here once again. It's just, as always, unevenly distributed. Danielle, thanks for being on the show.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey folks, we're at the BMC Exchange event. We're talking about innovation and the pace at which it's coming. And the question I have for you, Ram, as we start out here is it coming too fast? Is it not? People seem to be struggling to keep up. They're like behind on several releases. Every time you wake up, there's yet another new innovation. And I don't want to sound like the guy who's telling everybody to get off my lawn. But the question is, is there some way to think about consuming this innovation at this pace that's different that we should maybe investigate more?
Fair enough. That's a great start, and definitely not a softball, Mike. Yeah. So the pace of innovation is certainly daunting, but let's maybe define what innovation is, right? We are in an era where there is so much change being manifested by way of new technology, new and previously unavailable forms of data, the connectivity and explosive growth in devices and what have you. And what's happening is in organizations, our customers, the developers are basically, as an example, releasing a whole set of new apps and services at a faster pace. And they're using new technologies, ephemeral technologies. The operations folks have the burden of managing all of these, and they don't know about some of these new architectures. So how do you basically manage all of these, right? That's just one example of the challenge that we're facing from a whole bunch of things being thrust at us. To me, innovation without customer adoption is useless. So what we are focused on in BMC is basically what can we do to solve business problems with specific technologies that helps it easier for customers to adopt our solutions. Case in point, predictive service ops, which you saw a short video of, and a full-length working demo is available at the Marketplace Innovation booth at BMC Exchange. This is about bringing together an existing set of BMC products as well as new incubations that we've developed in the BMC Innovation Labs, bringing all of those together to help customers auto-manage these new applications and services rather than being overwhelmed by the burden of this proliferation of new technologies and a whole host of other things that they frankly cannot keep pace with. That's a philosophy.
It used to be innovation was primarily driven by a single vendor would get a bunch of engineers together and something good might hopefully happen over a 3 to 5 year window. Are customers now coming to the innovation lab and participating in the development process more? And are you also, for that matter, seeing more open source software brought into this equation? And that kind of is the primordial soup for a lot of this stuff.
Yep. All of the above is a short answer, but let me qualify it, right? We established the BMC Innovation Labs back in Feb 2020. Timing was impeccable, 1 month before COVID. And then no customer was coming to us because they had serious problems to solve. And innovation was, we've got existential things to solve for. You guys have some interesting ideas, but we're going to put a pause on it. We're like, okay, that's fine, that makes sense. We were undaunted. We went and built out things that we had a lot of faith in. Fast forward, after the vaccines rolled out and everything, we've had a flurry of co-innovations with customers. I define co-innovation in 2 buckets, customer co-innovation and partner co-innovation, and we have plenty of both. I'm going to be talking more about it tomorrow during my keynote speech. But the principle is basically the same. To your point about the one vendor versus multiple vendors or what have you, our philosophy is it's not just about BMC products. It's what is the solution that matters, that addresses the business problem that the customer is trying to solve. So we work with implementation partners, we work with other independent software vendors, we work with hyperscalers to bring together a compelling integrated solution for that particular business problem that the customer is solving for. That's the approach to co-innovating with customers and with partners. And we're super selective about the partners. They have to have that innovation mindset and look at it in terms of what is the solution going to provide to the customer, not so much in terms of, okay, this is a time and material project that I want to build the customer for. That mindset doesn't work for us.
We've seen IT service management evolve many times over the last few decades. Today we hear a lot about AI ops, DevOps. You guys use the phrase service ops, I think. How is ITSM evolving? What should we be thinking about here? And how do all these acronyms actually come together in some way that is consumable?
Great question. So let me demystify service ops and try the other puzzle pieces together. Service ops is simply integrated service and operations management using a common foundation that has a common set of AI methods, common persistence tier, and common services based on standard constructs, right? So the notion of integrated service and operations management is basically to provide an end-to-end solution for customers. AI ops is a puzzle piece within service ops. AI ops is simply AI for IT operations, which is you had your traditional rules-based monitoring processes. Now you can apply specific AI methods to provide higher order insights on your underlying technology landscape. And that is AI for IT operations. And using AI for IT operations along with across the entire tech stack leads to what I call full stack observability. That gives you greater insights. With full stack observability, you again use the appropriate AI method to take the right set of action, remediation, compliance, patching, whatever you need to take. So that it kind of, AI ops enhances observability, observability feeds AI ops to take the right action. That's how we look at it. And then there is a whole service context in the middle that brings together integrated service and operations management. With respect to DevOps, what you talked about, part of this mission of service operations is to enable the SRE persona, which is fundamentally important to the DevOps continuum. So that's how we look at service operations or service ops as an enabler of the SRE persona, where the desired outcome is reliability. And reliability is the right balance of agility or speed and quality. So how can you release something at the requisite pace without compromising on quality is what we are looking to solve for.
Historically, we've had IT administrators. They tended to work with graphical tools. Now we have engineers that are starting to show up, and they're using DevOps processes. Is this an either-or equation, or is it going to be more like an and equation, where the two of them have to kind of come together and collaborate in some way that's interesting that we haven't quite wrapped our arms around?
Yeah, I think it's an and. It's not IT developers and then IT operations / administrators. The whole notion of DevOps was predicated on bridging that gap, right? And then when DevOps by itself did not solve for that, that's what saw the rise in the emergence or the rise of the SRE persona. Then you bake in security into it because you want to institute the appropriate level of automation and controls throughout your dev process as well as your ops process, not as an afterthought. So that's where DevSecOps comes in, and that's all of this is predicated on the continuous shift left, where you want to automate with everything as code to the extent that you can. And the whole notion again is to be able to do that for faster release cycles while balancing quality. That's how I see it.
We've been talking about the divide between IT and the business for, 4 decades, maybe more.
Yeah.
Do you think that as we make these changes that divide is going to narrow or has narrowed? And how quickly will it continue to come together?
So let's look at it in different buckets, right? Purchasing decisions on technology are not just the realm of IT. The business is increasingly, in fact, the business is the decision maker for a whole slew of technology investment decisions. So from that standpoint, that kind of collaboration is already happening. But I'll basically use a certain example to kind of underscore the point. If you transpose to the whole data and analytics space, my career was predominantly in that space. from the days of data warehousing and BI to the current days of AI methods using data stores, the likelihood of success has been relatively low. 75% or thereabouts of data and analytics initiatives have not been successful for a variety of reasons. And the reasons are multifold, but one of the primary reasons is the inability to successfully scale and operationalize across the enterprise. So they succeed for one or two use cases, but then they fail when they try to do that. So case in point, data ops has come into vogue as a practice that basically promises to improve the likelihood of success. And data ops is based on applying DevOps best practices to the field of data management. And how does it answer your question? So it's an integrated team across business and IT that works together on a set of data initiatives. And the data ops part is predicated on two things. One is collaboration, borrowing from the DevOps mantra, where you have a business product owner. So you have a business data product owner that's part of the team. I'm oversimplifying, but you kind of get the point. The second is automation. And automation is where we play a significant role, because automation here refers to a couple of things. One is data pipeline orchestration. And we have Control-M, which is the number one orchestration solution there, and a lot of customers are using it for their complex data pipeline orchestration. Second is the notion of business data observability. In other words, what is the line of sight that you have to data as it flows through the pipeline that informs your business person of the health, performance issues, and what have you, and what insights can you provide? So that's what we are solving for. That will bring together the business and the IT folks from that plane. And that's just to illustrate the point of the broader set of must-have collaboration between business and IT that is necessary for success.
Data management has always been a challenge. I know very few organizations that would get a good housekeeping seal of approval for the way they manage their data. Yet we talk about data as the new oil, but it seems like all our refineries are broken. So how do we solve this problem?
Yeah. So since you brought that up, I'll tell you. I used to say data is the new bacon or data is the new currency. I've definitely used data as the new oil. I managed to offend people that think oil is not a good source of fuel. I've managed to piss off people that basically said, "Yeah, currency, you're too monetary focused." Bacon, no, I'm a vegetarian, vegan, it doesn't speak. So now I use data as a new sunshine. But kidding aside, hopefully nobody complains about sunshine, but kidding aside, to answer your question, right, it's people really grapple with how to succeed in their data and analytics initiatives, and solving for that has kind of been elusive. I think it's you really have to figure out what is the business problem that you're solving for, what is the right set of data, what is a use case, what is the right set of data, and then only look at what is the appropriate technology. A lot of the reasons for the failure have been, okay, I want to hone in on a particular platform which is going to give me nirvana, and then it's death by technology pre-selection. Right? There's so many things that go wrong in this continuum, but it's really about honing in on what is the use case, what is the desired outcome, then roll back to what is the information set that I need, what is the right set of methods that I can apply to get the insights from this set of information, and how do I do it in digestible bites. That would be my approach to solving this kind of a conundrum.
You cannot walk down the street these days without somebody claiming to have AI for this or AI for that. We have algorithms, they've been around forever and a day. We now have machine and deep learning. What should people expect from AI as we go forward? What's real and what's not?
So if somebody comes and tells you, use our AI solution, it's the best thing in the world, guaranteed success tomorrow, that's snake oil sales, right? What I would basically say is, AI is eventually going to improve upon your traditional approaches, but it requires a lot of help. There's a lot of training data. The methods have to be trained, and for that you require a lot of historical data. So the basic premise for the most part in many use cases, I'm not counting deep learning and a bunch of other things, but standard NLP or a bunch of traditional AI methods that are being applied. You have a set of historical data, you apply that, you have an AI method to solve a business problem, you basically figure it out or you program it. You apply the historical data as training data. The model basically learns, and then it starts looking at patterns. And then you apply that pattern recognition to your new set of data, and based on that historical data analysis, it's going to give you some results, whether it's correlation or whether it's basically detecting anomalies or a bunch of other things. Use the data. So my advice to customers is start slow, take 1 or 2 use cases, use training data, learn what you can. And you've got your traditional method, you've got your AI-based method. Take them both out for a spin. If the AI method gives you over time a certain percentage order of magnitude improvement over your traditional method, embrace it. Don't just get taken in by the buzzword, and don't expect instant success. It's going to happen over a period of time.
Do you think, coming full circle on this conversation, that the way that we have consumed IT doesn't really lend itself to this new pace of innovation, because we have a lot of products that we bought with an on-premise mindset, and maybe we need to rethink what is a product, what's a platform, and maybe we're subscribing to things instead of buying and licensing things, but is that all part of this innovation conversation?
It certainly is. I think the couple of things happened, right? So why are the hyperscalers, why have they been successful? Because they help you deploy new architectures almost instantaneously on their infrastructure. Your purchasing cycle time has gone down. You don't need to own and purchase your additional things on top of your your infrastructure, right? Your SaaS solution or whatever tech component you want to evolve. They've developed and deployed new architectures such as microservices, containers, and other things that can be easily consumable, right? So with all of these, they've provided a mechanism for organizations to go and deploy things faster, which runs counter to the traditional IT approach of the last, maybe 10 years back, where, okay, let's identify a problem, let's identify a set of requirements, let's go through a procurement cycle, let's get something, and then we'll roll this out 12 years back. The pace is, you can't do that. That pace is not available. So you've got, in many companies, 2 camps, right? One is the fast-paced, and that's why digital transformation became what it is. Can we build new products and services and roll them out at a pace that is desired by the business, as opposed to the more traditional stuff, which is keep your lights on, let me manage it the traditional way? The two kind of coexist today, but I think the pace of innovation is going to dictate and mandate that IT moves faster at a pace that the business basically is screaming for.
So when we think all that through for a minute, what is the one innovation that you're most excited about right now? The one that if you were going to the innovation casino, you'd place a bet on this and it said, this is a winner.
So there's a whole slew of things that you can innovate on, right? It's about finding, for us, what is the right set of problem that we can solve that lends itself well to extending our knowledge but is still valuable to customers. And for me, that is edge computing and IoT. And the rationale is simply as follows, right? BMC has been helping the largest, most complex organizations manage their IT assets for over 40 years. We've taken that knowledge. Now, edge computing has come in as a new paradigm where there's been an explosive growth in devices and machines and components, right? Connected devices. And there's also been a significant increase in computing power. So the goal is to solve for managing those assets and harnessing that data at or close to the source of that data, or said otherwise, at or close to the edge. What does that mean? It's the same kind of problems for IT asset management, except that it is not in central compute, which is what BMC has done traditionally, but it's more at edge compute. So taking that knowledge for IT asset management, we're applying it to OT asset management, or operational technology, or edge devices. And we are gung-ho about that. It's the same set of problems: edge data management, edge analytics, edge automation, edge asset lifecycle management, all coupled with edge security. So that's what I'm betting big on.
All right. Well, that's where we are then. We're going to put everything on the edge and
and it's not an edge or cloud, right? It's an additional deployment paradigm that adds to the already complex hybrid IT landscape, and you have to solve for it.
But the point is we're now trying to process and analyze data at the point where it is being created and consumed.
Yes.
And that's a whole other ballgame.
Absolutely.
All right, Ram, thanks for coming by.
Mike, thank you. It's a pleasure, as always.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everyone, happy Thursday. Cody J. Brown here with some programs happening next week at Techstrong Learning. So Monday we are without any Techstrong Learning experiences, so feel free to check out any of our on-demand programs. But we do have a full day on Tuesday, so kicking off at 11 a.m. Eastern, Sumo Logic brings you an expert panel titled AAA, Analytics, Automation, and AI Ops. Our speakers will review experiences using AI Ops in anomaly detection and discuss how analytics are the foundation for great observability. Following at 1 p.m. Eastern, Chronosphere is joining us on DevOps.com to tell us why distributed tracing doesn't have to suck. As we continue to move away from monolithic architectures, it's become evident that we need to reevaluate how we search for and identify issues in our workflows. Let's take a fresh look at distributed tracing. And last but not least, Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, tune in for Overcoming Release Management Transformation Challenges. Waterfall update releases have shown themselves to be slow and problematic in our fast-paced digital age, but moving to more frequent, smaller patches comes with a set of obstacles all its own. Our panel aims to help you start small to overcome these big challenges. So that's all I've got for you right now, but we do have plenty of upcoming programs next week. If you can't wait until then please do look at our on-demand programs at devops.com/webinars and be sure to look in the on-demand section. Have a great Friday and a better weekend, everyone.
Previously on Engineering the Change.
The program at BocaCode was amazing.
My career is completely changed from barely being able to, hold down a job to now being sought after by some of the biggest tech companies in the world.
BocaCode has built me up.
If you grant me the scholarship, like I said, I will share my knowledge with people, with women or immigrants.
Dreamed of having the opportunity to show the world, how great, I can be.
I feel that anything I do my best in. So wherever I end up, I'm going to do the best I can to make sure I'm making a positive impact. So this scholarship would definitely assist me in changing the trajectory of my life.
Excited to tell Carly about her winning. She is so pumped to really embark on her career as a software engineer. All right, Carly, we got the whole camera crew with us. All right, come on in, guys. We're coming in. Carly, I'm sorry, your name?
Harold.
Harold?
Yes.
So we're making this presentation of $10,000. We got some puppies. This is right here.
Is this?
Sure. Oh, here. Camera.
Huh? What?
Puppies coming over here. Hey, how you doing? Donald, we're here. Hey, man. How are you? I want to present you with this. Oh my gosh. We had a tough time. We couldn't pick the finalists. You guys are all great. We thought you're going to be great engineers. So you're in.
Oh my gosh.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. This is a very awesome opportunity, and I look forward to strive for the best. Awesome. Thank you.
You're going to be a great engineer, man. Thank you so much, Donald. You know, this was by far the strongest class of people we had who applied for the scholarship. We were able to get it down to 3 finalists, but then in meeting with the judges, we couldn't pick a winner. So what we decided to do is just pick all 3 finalists as winners, and so we want to make this contribution to your life. And we're going to award Stephanie Sanchez as one of our 3 Spring 2022 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship. Stephanie, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, I'm Alan Schimmel, CEO of Techstrong Group. We are a tech media company based here in Boca Raton, Florida, and we have been for 8 years. I've been a resident of Boca Raton for 20 years now, and it's always been one of my hopes, aspirations, is that South Florida would become a tech hub. So we opened this program, it's called Engineering the Change, to underserved communities including women, people of color, but any underserved community in the tech space, right? When I look back, and we have some of the past winners here with us, and I look at the difference it's made in the community, in their lives, it's something to be really proud of.
So, you know, one of the things that Boca Code really takes is partnerships with companies like Techstrong and other local companies, because we need them to, you know, to help support the school, and we need them to, you know, to hire and interview our students as well.
We're going to introduce some of our past winners and just have them briefly talk a little bit about, you know, how their life has gone since taking this class.
When I received the scholarship, I had a lot of mixed emotions. I was scared but excited for this new chapter. I had worked in the tech industry, but I had never been in an engineering role. You know, the people at Boca Code, Todd, who I affectionately call Coach, because I kind of think of him as the coach in a game, they guide me step by step the whole process. When I graduated from the cohort, I had over 10 offers from tier 2 and tier 1 tech companies, and I had my pick, which was the first time in my life I really had to make a choice where it was completely my decision.
The scholarship changed my life really from 0 to 100. As I said before, I was in a state that I was really lost in terms of my career. I had a neuroscience degree from FAU, but I couldn't get a job. Once I got the scholarship and I did the 10 weeks at Boca Code, it completely changed my life to better, because now I have found actually my passion, which is not just tech, but being able to help women get into this field.
Winning the scholarship was once in a lifetime opportunity to change my career. The program at Boca Code was amazing. I studied a lot of fundamentals of software engineering, and I proved myself that I'm capable of being a successful developer. At that time, I couldn't even imagine how I would need this job in 3 months when the war hit my homeland, Ukraine, and this salary of software developer gave me opportunity to help Ukrainian people in this hard time.
So this year, we wound up with 3 finalists for the scholarship, and we brought them into our panel of judges, and each of the finalists were interviewed. And then the judges got together and we had to pick just one. we thought we tried to pick just one, and we really couldn't pick just one. And they were three outstanding candidates. And so what we've decided is to give all three of them scholarships. First person is Carly Dorless.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. So
I'll hold the check for you.
I will do my best to be successful and to help other women and other people.
Our next winner of the Engineering the Change Scholarship for 2022 is a gentleman named Donald Vizio, and Donald will tell you his story. Donald, come on up.
First of all, I want to thank Techstrong, Todd, for introducing me to the scholarship. And, this is an amazing opportunity coming from Haiti. And I hope with this opportunity that Techstrong and Todd introduced me to, I hope to introduce it to others just like myself and give back to my community and show them that, software engineering is cool. It's not just for nerds.
Our third winner for this year's Engineering the Change Scholarship is Stephanie Sanchez.
First of all, thank you both for this opportunity, and congratulations to my fellow recipients. I know we're going to make a significant change in the world. I come from a background of social work, and so I hope to be able to continue to put the people aspect in technology as we help others around us. I'm so grateful to be able to be a part of this. Thank you.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hello, everybody. This is Mike Rothman, General Manager of Techstrong Research, Chief Strategy Officer of Techstrong Group, and welcome to another interview for Techstrong TV. Today we have Ganesh Pai from Uptycs, and he is going to, again, give us a sense of kind of some of the evolution of security and detection around endpoints and security and their innovative use of OS query, and really how you scale up detection, especially from an endpoint perspective. As we know, it is challenging to get on top of all of our devices and really just to ensure that they're protected from all the threats that are out there. So Ganesh, how are you doing this morning? You doing okay?
I'm doing fantastic. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Mike, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you bet. So why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and a little bit about Uptycs and give us a sense of what the company's about and what problems you're solving.
Absolutely. So a little bit about myself. Engineer by training, technologist by vocation, and an entrepreneur by choice. I've been very fortunate to be in the company of right people at the right time. This venture, Uptycs, me and my co-founders, we got going in the summer of 2016. We were inspired by the notion of using observability techniques in the realm of cybersecurity based on our prior background. The venture today, as we speak, is 6.5 years old. And what we do for our customer base today is a unique approach to getting visibility into their security challenges and security controls they need to put in place. But in terms of measurable outcomes for our customers, what we do today is we provide risk reduction by looking into two important areas: threats and vulnerabilities. And we've pioneered a unique model where we use telemetry as a basis, collect the data, and then draw conclusions which have arguably high fidelity and efficacy as demonstrated by the growth of the venture. I'll pause here, but hopefully that sets the stage in terms of where we are today and what we've accomplished.
It does. And a couple of the things you mentioned there, Ganesh, really kind of, resonated with me, right? And that's kind of the idea of both risk reduction and leveraging telemetry in a more, kind of applicable way, right? Actionable way from that perspective. So I want to dig into that a little bit more. So what are the main data sources you guys are consulting? How are you gathering that data, aggregating it? What kind of analytics are you doing? Since, again, a lot of folks find that as one step removed from voodoo, right? You're kind of sitting there trying to figure out how do I make sense of all this data that I have in order to get to a conclusion, right? To get to a prioritized idea of what they can and should be remediating.
Now, great question. Before I get into what we do, perhaps you might be interested because, in other domains where there's a lot more budgets and dollars at stake, as in ad decision analytics and other realms, streaming-based analytics is the basis to make quick decisions so that someone can decide who gets to see what ads. We repurpose such high-fidelity techniques where you can look at data in motion from various asset categories and draw conclusions in the realm of cybersecurity. Today, if you look at the various attack surfaces one might encounter in a modern cloud-native organization, you realize that the productivity endpoint is the laptop. That's where arguably in many tech companies, software, the crown jewels of the organization are produced. And again, they get deployed into some kind of a public cloud as in AWS GCP. But a developer undergoes the act of, connecting with some kind of identity provider, connecting with GitHub to pull his code down, compile it, and then push it into cloud where the crown jewels, the software running in the cloud, generate the revenue or whatever for progression of that organization. Now, if you look at all the potential attack vectors which are represented in this chain of the arc of developer from his laptop to the cloud, what we at Aptex have pioneered is a unique approach to get the telemetry at scale from these attack surfaces and stream it into a backend. 6 years ago, our fortunes aligned when we got started. There was an open source instrumentation which came out of Facebook called as OS Query. What it allowed you to do is it allowed you to scrape the operating system endpoints to get information about static data. Over the passage of time, it could also capture behavioral data. And what you did with that data was analytics and conclusions, and it allowed you to extract that at scale. So we saw an opportunity to align with a vision that with so many attack surfaces, how can you use streaming techniques and backend analytics, which are very prevalent in the domain of ad decision, CRM, and other places, business process optimization as in SAP and Salesforce and others. And we chose the structured telemetry from these asset categories being sent to the cloud and do decision analytics there, right? So I'll pause you for a second. I know I said a whole lot. Yeah. But, if you'd love to parse that and I have specific questions, I can drill in further.
I do, because, it strikes me, and I'm very familiar with, kind of streaming analysis and kind of the ability to, make decisions in, I'll call it pseudo real time, because at the end of the day, you always have some latency in the process from that standpoint. But one of the things that we talk about, especially when monitoring cloud environments, that you seem to be mapping to, endpoints and a variety of devices, is this idea of fast path alerting. So, and by that, what I mean is, you have alerts set up in your cloud provider for specific activities, right? Use of root account, use of, kind of an overprivileged storage account, but something that, again, you don't want it to take enough, the time to go through something like CloudTrail or Azure Log or, Azure Logging, have to go into a SIM, do some analytics on that, right? That latency that you have in there, that 15 to 20 minute delay may kill you, right? So streaming and doing that on the platform gives you the ability to get that notification or that alert in front of somebody almost immediately. So it strikes me as you're doing a similar type of thing by leveraging OS Query from a telemetry gathering and aggregation standpoint and a streaming approach to ensure that, again, you're kind of looking for certain conditions in almost real time that would warrant almost basically instant kind of either notification or possibly even automation on the back end of that.
Yeah, first off, you summarized it in a fantastic way. I should probably consider asking our head of marketing to see if you could just surmise so much from a few sound bites that I provided. That's fantastic. To your point, absolutely true. What's really happening is that in the traditional realm, you had a lot of intelligence either baked into the endpoint or at the source of telemetry, and then you generated alerts which went into a traditional SIM, and the correlation across the asset categories happened out there. Now, where we've flipped it around is that the actual endpoint is doing virtually nothing. I mean, it is doing something. It is capturing the telemetry in real time, but it's transmitting and it made available in the backend, to your point, in pseudo real time. And what that allows us to do is to do things at cloud scale at the backend. Because each source of telemetry, whether it's AWS service provider using a connector or using OS Query as a sensor on an endpoint or a node of a Kubernetes cluster, what it does is it transmits the telemetry to the backend. And for us, we have the ability to look at the spectrum of telemetry in two different ways. Once, while it's arriving on the wire, we are able to extract signals and then store the data in a structured format so that we can use columnar compression and other big data techniques to do historical aggregation. But the signals which we extract from this telemetry while it is in streaming then allows us to use various graph correlation techniques to say that across asset categories or within an asset category, are there graph-based approaches which are leading indicators of malicious activity? Yep. Now, this has worked really well for us because if you were to look at it from the side of how attackers tend to think, they don't think about the assets in silos, right? They're going to take whether it's the laptop is the weak link or your CI/CD pipeline is the weak link or your cloud service provider is the weak link. They're going to be continuously probing, right? So while the attackers are potentially doing that and they're not thinking in silos, traditionally, due to a wide variety of reasons, defenders have not had the good fortune of not thinking in silos and going across that complete arc from laptop to cloud. And that's the kind of innovation that we've bought, that complete arc from laptop to cloud. You've got data available both in pseudo real time, as you said, to draw conclusions, as well as on a historic basis and correlate.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because that does bring up a pretty interesting organizational challenge, right? Which is that every one of these teams has their own mechanisms to figure out, what's happening, how they track it, ultimately how they fix it, their own kind of operational and remediation types of motions. So how do you start breaking down, some of these barriers, right? You mentioned observability up front, and a corollary, you're trying to use some of the observability constructs within the context of cybersecurity. And that's interesting to me, right? Because this siloed thing really does impact, kind of the ability of folks to do that. And it's getting harder, right? Because cloud's happening and a lot of business folks are starting to develop their own IT-oriented or technology-driven stacks and applications. And on, cloud platforms, you have the ability to not necessarily deal with IT directly. So you have a lot of folks that are going around those. I call it business IT, right? Some folks call it shadow IT. I hate that term because, these folks are just trying to get their job done, and IT getting in the way, they'll just go around you if you're getting in the way and not, providing productivity. But how does this approach really start to, in effect, democratize the ability for a lot of different organizations to, really get their hands on some of the threat data and some of the threat perspectives so that they can start to fix some of these things themselves?
Great question. The last part of what you said is key. And data is at the forefront. When you convert the security problem into a data problem, which is to say that data is the biggest dimension on which you can tee off and draw conclusions, it creates opportunities for teams to come together. You can think of it in terms of a couple of dimensions. One dimension within the security organization, as much as they're under one umbrella, there is the prescriptive nature of security, as in vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, audit and compliance, things which are very hygiene-centric. They typically work off of static information to say that you have a password which has not been rotated or a disk encryption is missing, right? It's almost prescriptive and quasi-factual in nature. You fix that, then your hygiene improves. And then there is the part which is more behavioral in nature. Someone, due to like either loss of credentials or other reasons, has gotten into your machine as doing something nefarious, but it's a lot harder to identify because you look for behavioral trait, right? So within the security organization, there is two pieces of data that you can get, which is information about static configuration and behavioral changes. Now, this has extremely interesting implication to the other dimension which you brought up, whether it's the DevOps and the security operations or the IT and the security team. The reason I bring that up is if you were to take the same lens of data and say that this is configuration related data and this is behavioral data, the behavioral data sometimes tends to be of value for the DevOps team to figure out, is there a performance issue? Something acting malicious and doing crypto mining versus a piece of software doing something bad, it's a legit piece of software, it's misbehaving. The constructs for observability are very similar. You want to look at state changes and draw conclusions. Same is the case with IT as well as the compliance thing, if you look at it, right? The compliance people are trying to figure out things to say that, is this good practice? And that's where we start things bleeding into a common area, especially in the realm of what's called as zero trust networking. You want to make sure that the hygiene is good, which makes the IT guys happy and the security guys happy, right? So as you start looking at it in the two dimensions of prescriptive security and behavioral security and cross-organization, we're trying to find this approach of looking at it by moving one step up. And our team has come up with the whole notion of shift up security. That's what we want to think about it, like a way to like start looking at it from multiple dimensions, but potentially at one layer above, where traditionally security and IT and within security, compliance and threat detection have been somewhat siloed.
That's interesting because, one of the pushbacks we get on shift left now is, and that's obviously, kind of moving security closer to the developer on that front, is that, we're kind of giving overworked developers, more to do and making them more responsible for all sorts of stuff. So now who do we shift up to, right? Who ends up having to, kind of hold that bag, once we're able to do that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The thing that you don't want to do is get in the path of the developer. The nice thing about SaaS-based interactivity, and if you look at how a developer might do his work today, right? A routine act is to assert your identity to a provider such as Okta, and then connect to some, source code provider such as GitHub, and then pull a code down, do your work. And once you're done, you probably are using CI/CD to push your workload for validation, and then you might push it into the cloud. The really nice thing about this approach is that each of the service provider gives you three pieces of information, and it does so asynchronously without having to do anything in the path of the developer. While the developer is going through this act, You can, by talking to the APIs of the service providers, you can get information about the configuration topology. You can get information about audit trail, as in through the lens of the SaaS provider or the cloud provider, what changes did the developer do, right? And it also tell you where exactly did this come in from, and is in flow logs. So in an asynchronous mode through an API, you can actually observe so much and not be in the path of the developer, and yet help them out to say that, hey, here's something which might be leading to bad security hygiene. Perhaps we can collaborate and fix.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So as we kind of wrap up, Ganesh, one of the things, again, it just kind of strikes me that having a fairly open and widely deployed aggregation technology like OS Query, right? Combining that with all of the data that you can get from a variety of different places, in that stack, being able to aggregate that and doing, modern data analytics on that, and then combining that with, really streaming in real time to look for, certain deviations from what is either normal or, kind of would violate a configuration policy, does start to get towards this idea of, as you said, right, leveraging data in order to further our security outcomes, right, or better or improve our security outcomes. So did I kind of summarize that right? Did I miss anything, big?
No, I think you summarized it really well. And the end goal is, while we help organization reduce risk, because that's the big reason why they are investing in a product and technology like ours, but where we enable them to make that happen is it allows them to do, better decisions around their risk. It allows them to go across their asset categories and, go across heterogeneous infrastructure, if you will. And then the last part is, this is somewhat measurable. There's this whole notion of mean time to resolution, which has been around for a long time. Yeah. But nowadays, there's a desire to have what's called as a mean time to know, because if you want to look at your misconfigurations of a S3 bucket or something, you might want to quickly have a graphical view to understand what could be out here as configured so that I can infer from that, right? The ability to know allows you to make informed decision. It's a little bit more intangible as in a resolution. It may not have a resolution, but knowing allows you to take actions and remediate things before things go really wrong.
No, that's great. That's great. So Ganesh, tell us how to get in touch with your company and other resources that they may want to check out after hearing this interview.
Yes, the fastest way to get in touch is through our website at www.uptix.com. We've got lots of resources out there. Feel free to reach out to us over LinkedIn or to reach out to us over Twitter. We've got a team who's very interested in hearing other people's perspective. And that, I would say, is the fastest way to get hold of us. Of course, my email address is gpi@uptix.com, should people want to pursue that path. But otherwise, our website is the best starting point.
That's fantastic. So I want to thank Ganesh. Appreciate your time today, appearing with us on Techstrong TV, giving us some perspective on, again, how we can start to get our arms around, more structured and useful collection of data, really from endpoint all the way through to kind of the cloud platforms where a lot of these applications are ultimately being hosted. And with that, this is Mike Rothman, and we will hand off to another great session on Techstrong TV.
Mike, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Craig Box, who's Vice President of Open Source and Community for Armo, and they're trying to build a true open source community for Kubernetes security, and there's a project that goes with that, and I'm going to let Craig describe what that is. Craig, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We have seen open source take over just about every other aspect of IT except security, and now we're starting to see some movement here in terms of open source projects as it relates to Kubernetes security. What is changing about the way we think about open source and security, and how should we be approaching that as a group and as a community?
I feel that the progression to open source has clearly happened through all of the platform pieces that lay underneath. A few years back, it would be strange to say we're running Linux in any capacity, and now it's just assumed that everyone's going to be running most, if not all, of their infrastructure on top of Linux. The same is largely true of Kubernetes. The assumption now is that people are using these platforms, and so as we move further up the stack, the question is, well, what kind of disruption to some degree, but what kind of technology is going to be used? And the default assumption for all new technology is that it will be open source. People who are coming in from these platforms, who are using Linux and who are using Kubernetes, are more inclined to look at open source tooling. Another change that's happened because of those two platforms in particular is the drive for technologies that can be administered and run by development teams, as well as perhaps DevOps teams. And so there is also an assumption from those people that they're going to be able to come in and play with tools that they have visibility into. They may or may not want to hack on the tools themselves, but they want to know that they can, and they want to know that they have visibility into that. So I feel that security tooling from the beginning has been driven from the top down. It's very much a CISO, CSO kind of conversation. And it's been something that is thrust upon development teams. It hasn't really provided them any kind of benefit. They've assumed that their software was okay, and they had to run an antivirus platform, or they had to run some kind of security software. So Armo's looking at building this out as being a net win to the developers. Like, what can we do here to add quality of life benefits to those development teams to build a platform that is targeted to the developer, to the DevOps person, rather than a security team? So it's trusted by the security professionals, but it's built and designed for the development teams.
Many of us feel like we missed the opportunity once again, where we had a new platform and we didn't focus on security up front, and it was an afterthought. So what exactly are you guys doing to close that gap, and what is this project going to do?
Yeah, the three different parts of the life cycle that Kubescape is going to take action on. You have your manifest files. You have the things that you're deploying into your software, your YAML, your Helm files, and so on. You have the API server. You have the things that you're actually running in the application. And then you have the operating system, the worker nodes, the things that run underneath. And there have been some great software packages that have targeted one of those pieces in the past, but Kubescape really is the first open source platform that's aiming at all three of those. That's looking at an end-to-end system where people are able to look at the security holistically across the estate and be able to verify not just at the time of their system being deployed, but then afterwards. So if someone's deployed something, especially something they've downloaded off the internet that's relatively untrusted, they're able to verify that there's no CVEs or anything at that particular time. They're able to validate their cluster against best practices from people like the NSA, who are now publishing guidance on how you should harden the Kubernetes cluster. And then you're also able to go later on and say, well, if that guidance updates, if there's more information that comes out about what someone should be looking at, then there's something continually watching the cluster and that's able to alert administrators and say, all right, well, this has changed. There's been a vulnerability come up in this thing, and this is something you might now need to pay attention to.
Is the responsibility for security shifting? We hear a lot about the quote unquote shift left, but all the way to developers. Some people wonder, because most developers I know, when the security course came up as an elective, they basically didn't take it. So, or is it more a question of leaning left, and we're just trying to put more guardrails into, say, the DevOps workflows so people don't make mistakes? What's our goal?
It can be either. I think the easiest way to answer that is to ask about administration and infrastructure. That can shift left or lean left depending on your company and what it is that they're looking to do. You can have a small company where a single person or a set of people act as all of those roles. by the time you get to a much larger company, there are normally different teams that deal with those particular functions. But it is good to be able to move that to be something that's earlier, something that is either thought about earlier or at least is guarded in such a way that people don't need to worry about it. As we move to having more people deploy and manage their own workloads, the developers who are responsible for building something are the best people to maintain it because they know what it is. There's no handoff to a different team or teams around the world. It's best to have those people manage the software because they are the people who have the most understanding of it, but also they are the people who have the best incentive. Like if you know that something you build, you're on the hook for maintaining it yourself, then you put more care and thought into how it can be maintained. See.
How big is the community today, and what's your ambitions for it? Is it part of a consortium today, or will it be part of a consortium? What are you guys thinking?
Yeah, I'm just about to start this role, and my experience is that having spent a lot of time evaluating software in the community, that I'm really impressed with both Cubescape and how Armo is positioning it. It's something that's really easy to get started with. It is part of their commercial product, but it is fully open source. And so we're looking to be clearer about the differentiation between that. There is a commercial product. We don't necessarily want people to have to know about that or use it to get value out of the open source. We also want to see people be able to take the open source Cubescape project and use it with various other open source projects. I've been working a lot on Istio over the last few years. We see a lot of people adopt that as a security platform. So I'm looking in my new role as to how I can build partnerships with other teams and how I can make it an easy fit for people to run these things together. I'm looking at how we can grow the community of people who are passionate about having this here. And I'd say it might be strange to think of someone being passionate about running security tools, but having people who trust and understand that this is the right thing. It is in the process now, Cubescape is in the process now of being proposed to the CNCF. Part of the project, part of the thing we need to unravel there is that relationship between the commercial vendor. We've seen people in the past who have tried to brand their company as being enterprise product name, for example. And so there's no real clarity in terms of how to do that. And so one of the things that I'll be looking at is how to maintain an identity as the creator of a project without necessarily being tied to the name of that project in the way that you are when you own both of those pieces yourself.
Trademarks are tricky these days.
Indeed.
We have seen a lot of conversation about open source software security in general. There's been no ends of meetings and commissions. You live in the open source security space of cloud native. Is there something that community can do to help the rest of the open source community wrap their heads around all these issues? Because the rest of the community is made up of, outside of the Linux group and a couple other projects, it's typically a small handful of people that are trying to figure out how to secure something like Log4j shell, and they need all the help they can get. So is there something to be done here?
There's a couple of touch points, and it's a bit glib perhaps to refer back to an ex-KCD comic, but you will have seen the one where there's a big tower of bricks and there's one little tiny piece which says this piece of open source software is part-time maintained by someone in Nebraska who does it on the weekends. And if that person takes the wrong week off, for example, the entire internet falls over. So it's interesting to present this not necessarily as a technical problem, but it's a personnel problem and it's a people problem. This has been acknowledged by the work that's been done by the US government, and it also came up in the results of the recent DORA survey that was published, is that it's really a teams and trust issue. Is the more that your team is able to have psychological safety, that actually correlates higher with secure outcomes than necessarily technological outcomes. And when it comes to open source software and how we keep software safe in general, in large part, there is a funding question. There are people who built a thing and said, all right, this is something that I like and I'm just going to put out there. They're not necessarily interested in working on that long term. They're not building a business around it. And some of those components, like Log4j, as you mentioned before, some of them can become key parts of serious infrastructure. And then there is a community requirement to have those maintained. It may not flow all the way back to the original person who created that. It may be that companies need to look at spinning up teams for things that they work at. And it may also be that that's not sustainable. I don't necessarily feel that having the large companies who work on these or who use these projects, who don't work on the pieces themselves, but people who consume Log4j, they shouldn't all be expected to commit an engineer to managing and looking after this. But with commercial software, you do have some sort of vendor that you're able to go to. And so I'd be interested in seeing what various organizations and government bodies do to find a way to replicate that for open source software, to have some vendor body or consortium or something which employs maintainers and is able to offer some sorts of guarantee. And you can never have any true guarantee, but you could say, all right, well, we have people who are looking at this in the event that a vulnerability is discovered. There's a place for it to be disclosed to. There are people who can work on that, who can get patches out in a commercial sense across the industry, not just single vendors doing it for their own commercial Linux distributions, but who can look at this stuff and maintain it more for the benefit of everybody.
And you're building a community. And I think one of the issues that comes up frequently is it's great to have contributors, but there's a lot more that's needed, right? You need folks to help with documentation. Heck, if guys wanted to fund some stuff, they don't necessarily need to have their own developers. They could just, make a donation somewhere. So do you think people understand what it is the scope of an open source project requires to be sustainable? And, do we need to do a little more on the education there?
There's always more education that can be done. I think various vendors and people in the space have different opinions on this. A lot of the work that I've done in Istio over the last few years is exactly the things that you've said. There is a great team of engineers who are working on building them out. That's not a thing that I'm doing hands-on keyboard as often as I used to. What I'm doing a lot more now is looking at how we can look at documentation, how we can look at presenting the project, how we can look at relationships with groups like the CNCF. I just led the process of getting Istio transferred into the CNCF. So there is a huge set of work to be done to manage an open source project outside of the effort of just writing the code. And it's always good to get people involved in that. And there are a lot of people who are interested in the life cycle of a project or an open source program outside of writing the code that can be tapped on there, who are willing to get involved. Kubernetes has done a great job at building a contributor community around that. For people who are looking to get involved in some kind of non-code fashion, I'll look to what learnings I can take from that and also my own experience as to how we build a community around Kubescape. But there is always room for people who like to say that they're contributing to open source software to look at putting people other than full-time engineers work on the project.
All right, folks. Well, a wise man once said, if we don't all hang together, we will surely hang separately. So, Craig, best of luck in your project, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
And back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Scott Trevino. We're talking about connected hospitals and cybersecurity issues. Scott is a senior vice president for cybersecurity at TriMedics. It's an area that they specialize in, so I'm sure we're all about to learn something we probably didn't know or suspect. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So, the more things are connected, the more challenging security becomes. It's always been kind of one of the paradoxes of our happy little IT industry. Integration is often the enemy of security, and hospitals are rich targets. So if we have all these connected hospitals, what are the challenges with securing that, and what do folks need to be thinking about?
Great question. And as I love what you said. As things become more connected, the number of connection points increases, and it's a complexity increase that's not just linear, but exponential. It's almost a factorial. And when you look at medical device connectivity, that's sort of the dual-edged sword. We've got great innovation on the devices side, more connectivity, which is estimated to get to almost 70% in the next couple of years, medical device connectivity. But on the other end, you've got increased risk when it comes to cybersecurity and managing that for healthcare. So that's kind of at the heart of the risk discussion around cybersecurity and connected medical devices. And then when you look at healthcare as a whole as one of our critical infrastructures, it is one of the most highly, if not the most highly exploited portions of our critical infrastructure, and has significant opportunity to evolve and improve. When you look at it, for 11 years straight, healthcare has the highest cost of a breach at between $9 and $10 million a year, with no slowdown in sight. And recent data shows that at the end of last year in Q4, globally, the number of attacks per week has increased almost 70% to 830 per week. So there's a massive opportunity here to address. And to put it in perspective in terms of connectivity, I said 70% of medical devices will be connected over the next couple of years. That's estimated, through 2028 at a 22% CAGR. So to put it in dollar perspective, we're looking at going from a market of connected devices of around $30 billion to over $120 billion in the next couple of years. So there's a big opportunity from my perspective.
Hospitals, of course, are dealing with ransomware left, right, and center, but are they prepared for this security challenge around connected devices? Are they thinking that through? Or is it just kind of something that, we'll deal with it when we get there?
So what I would say is that there's a wide spectrum, just like any industry or any group. I would say as a whole, healthcare has really pivoted over the last few years to realize the significant need for cybersecurity. And I would say, yes, that the majority of healthcare providers and systems are looking at cybersecurity. The maturity level for, overall as an industry, I would say is behind the other critical infrastructure areas. I mentioned that before, and it's probably one of the reasons why healthcare is highly targeted, in addition to the value of the information and the sensitivity and what can happen through attacks and ransomware and denial of service, basically to patients or delay of service for them. And so what I would say is that there's a spectrum, but as a whole, there's big opportunity to improve. I would say the industry in general is behind other critical infrastructure. And what's really critical here is to put in place a comprehensive cybersecurity program, and in particular, have an understanding of what it means for medical devices, because the cybersecurity issues for medical devices are unique when it comes to other IoT due to the regulated nature of those devices, really driving whether there are off-the-shelf patches that are quickly available, other compensating controls, and what you can and cannot do from a cybersecurity standpoint for those devices.
Mm-hmm. Of course, not every healthcare organization is the size of Mass Gen or Columbia Presbyterian. A lot of these hospitals are in small towns, they're in small cities. Do they have the resources to do this, or do they need some additional help from outside, or is there cavalry coming over the hill for these folks?
That's another great point. And it's, a general, rural community hospitals in general have challenges with delivery of healthcare service and economic challenges, those sorts of things. And cybersecurity is no different. What I would say is that the general approach for cybersecurity may be the same, but the way it's delivered might be slightly different. For instance, there's technologies and services that can be acquired to put in place a cybersecurity program that may not have dedicated on-site resources, for instance, and may not require those. But the simple answer is yes, things can be done. And in fact, for cybersecurity, what I would say is that they can be done more easily than some of the other challenges where you might require folks on site to do work. You can do remote monitoring. You can put in a security operations center. You can help assist teams in implementing and training on how to apply patches and the availability of those things, and some of the other challenges around cybersecurity for healthcare. What I would also point out is that there's a confluence of challenges that are occurring in healthcare related to cybersecurity. On one hand, there is a shortage of cybersecurity talent in general, estimated at over 300,000 person shortage in terms of I'll call it general IT cybersecurity. On the other side of the fence, the biomed engineering or clinical engineering world or healthcare technology management has more people retiring than are being replaced on an annual basis, with a significant shortage there. And when you combine the two expertise, which is really required to apply cybersecurity in medical devices, you might be you're looking at scarcity in the market for those resources individually, but when you bring them together, it's, not to overuse the term, but it's almost a unicorn in some cases. So there's a lot of challenges with that. And so to your question, and the way I answered by doing things remotely, I think that's an efficient way for healthcare to address cybersecurity. Is you may not have the luxury of on-site, but you can probably scale and do virtual for a lot of things. to help deploy and improve the maturity posture, risk posture for healthcare through those sorts of approaches.
Do you think governments around the world are going to start paying more attention to this connected hospital cybersecurity issue? Because it does tend to impact their constituents, and it is a public safety issue at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I can say with firsthand knowledge, it's something I'm actively involved with in the US, in particular with FDA, with legislators on Capitol Hill. I've seen just in the last few years, I should say, I've been in the healthcare world my entire career, over 25 years now. And I would say cybersecurity has gotten the attention more so in the last couple of years than I've seen throughout my tenure. And I think that's a good thing. I think there's a lot of opportunity to educate around what it means for medical devices versus general cybersecurity. But I would say there's interest in all aspects, whether it's FDA from a regulatory standpoint, legislators, looking at what can they do through the mechanisms they have, whether new legislation, putting components into, the Medical Device User Fee Act to drive behaviors and requirements across the board in healthcare to ensure cybersecurity and safety. So I would say yes, but what I would also say is not quick enough. As I mentioned some of the data before, the threats are growing significantly. The level of technology evolution is fantastic, and that's a good thing. But with that comes increased risk and the need to respond. So I'll give an example. I really applaud what FDA is doing. They're working to update their pre-market guidance on the development of medical devices, right, which is fantastic, requiring secure by design practices for software and other risk considerations as you look at implementing new product. And that's terrific. I think the last update was around 2014. I helped comment and was, participated in that. And I think that's another message I'd give is folks should get involved to help educate and make sure what's coming out is good. But the wheels turn slow at that level, and the pace of what's happening in the cyber world, whether it's on the attacker response side, is evolving at a quicker pace than regulation and legislation. So we can't rest on that. But I would applaud what's happening and encourage more of it, and to encourage all participants in healthcare to get involved, because education into the legislators involved and the regulators is really important, because there's multiple factors to consider, not just the design of the product, but one of the things I'm most concerned about is the life cycle management, the clinical asset management and life cycle. So what happens in the post-market? What are the requirements for response on safety issues? A unique thing in medical device world is, in my experience, you see, roughly half only of the devices are patched that have known vulnerabilities. Even if there's let's say a patch for an operating system that's off the shelf, that's readily available for that operating system, it may not be validated and applied, or it may not be required to be provided. And so that presents a very unique challenge in the medical device ecosystem for cybersecurity. And I think there's opportunity to improve from a regulatory and legislative standpoint. I mentioned earlier the delay of treatment, and you mentioned safety for patients, which is where we start from and kind of work from to look at how to assess risk posture and go after our highest risks. Delay in treatment, I think, is a very significant risk, and I think that's the awareness of that is increasing. However, my opinion is that the delay of treatment risk is not at the level that requires appropriate action, meaning there's not a recall, a mandatory fix that's in place. And that's why you see the lack of patches being available for devices that are still susceptible to WannaCry, which is many years old now.
To that point, who is responsible for securing these devices? Because is it the manufacturer of the device who may or may not be providing some sort of service agreement around that? Or is it the responsibility of the IT team in the hospital? Or is this one of these classic kind of co-managed things that we got to figure out?
Yeah, I think it's the latter that you ended on there. I would say it's a complex ecosystem. So I'll start at the easy one, which is where I just ended in my last response. So it's very easy to see when there's an issue with a drug or a device that, let's say, has a mechanical failure and breaks and is found to be deficient in its design for safety. There's a recall. And we've all been a part of these, whether it's automotive, but on the medical side, it's very much the same, which is manufacturer will have to fix something they assess to have an intrinsic safety issue with it. And so that is the responsibility of the design owner who owns the 510K. So there's well-established processes for reporting on those safety issues and responding. And so that is a manufacturer responsibility. And so when you look at how I talked about the cybersecurity issue, a risk assessment is done for those security and safety issues, essentially, as they're reported, and an OEM responds to those and takes appropriate action based on the requirements of that risk assessment. So that's one aspect. So there's the OEM piece there. OEMs also may service device under contract at the behest of the owner of the device. So who the purchaser, the clinical provider typically. And the clinical provider also has their own IT network ecosystem for cybersecurity. So there's that responsibility that applies there in collaboration with whatever the relationship is or is not with the OEM, if there's a service contract there. If there's not a service contract, regardless if the device has an issue, there is a responsibility from the design owner for that product, just like there is with your automobile. It may be 10 years old, but if there's a safety recall, the OEM will fix it. Now, if the owner of the device services the device themselves through in-house service with a biomed team that's part of the hospital system, for instance, or they hire an independent service organization, that again would be a collaboration where the responsibilities are determined based on the contract with an independent service provider who may or may not provide a comprehensive medical device security program, which would then maybe change the boundaries of what would be there under other contracts. Now, if the owner of the equipment manages the service themselves or some hybrid form of it, you see where the complexity may lie, which is the network policies for the overall ecosystem might be specific to the hospital overall, generally, let's say, but you might have a subnetwork within an individual department for a particular device that's managed as part of a single OEM service contract for those device types within a system that has, its own biomedical, service department that may service other devices on its own without an OEM contract. So it can get fairly complicated, and hence the reason for a comprehensive medical device security program that takes into account the clinical asset management across the board. So it can handle who is responsible, where, how to best respond given an event, how to detect. And that's what I would say is another component of this. So your questions about who's responsible, what I would say is, if we step back for a moment, one thing to consider is that within the ecosystem for medical devices, without, and this will sound very simple, without good information, it's very difficult to even know what to do for which device and with whom is responsible. So having a comprehensive security approach for medical devices is critical, because what we find and what I find in industry is there is overall a lack of inventory accuracy. So almost every, the vast majority of facilities are that I have seen, when you go in and look at inventory, there's a difference between what's traditionally done as a physical inventory and managed in a traditional service world, and then there's what's really on the network when you think about cyber, hygiene and risk posture. And if you compare the two by employing some very straightforward technology just to see what traffic's on the networks, and you compare what medical devices are seen on a network versus what you think you have in your CMMS, there's a significant difference. It ranges widely, but I would say on average, we find 20 to 40% devices that were not known. So to get good, cyber hygiene, you need to know what you have. Now that's just knowing at a high level what devices you have. What's further required is understanding specific details and attributes related to those devices. So in order to know what is susceptible or vulnerable to a cybersecurity known vulnerability, for instance, you need to understand, the operating system, its revision number specifically, the specific details of the make and model of a medical device, because they can vary widely, what options are on the device, MAC address, those sorts of things. And traditionally in healthcare, so many of those attributes have not been collected because, working years back, the number of connected medical devices, the amount of cyber threats was much lower. So that's the foundation. You need good inventory. And then from that, you can really understand, okay, let's get that good. Then what is it that we need to do from a risk perspective? And that's how you can assess what's truly vulnerable. You can weigh the device's context. So there's a difference in the risk profile of a device based on where and how it's used. So for instance, you might have redundant CT scanners in a level 1 trauma center because that's a regulatory requirement, for that sort of certification and availability. So that those devices might be at a different risk level than the same CT scanner type that's in a 9 to 5 offsite radiology clinic that's not urgent care. So putting that into perspective, along with what the cyber profile is for the device, what vulnerabilities are there, help you understand risk prioritization, and then finally, how do you act? And so I mentioned before, how do you act depends on what's available for those vulnerabilities. And as I mentioned, in some cases, only about half, maybe a little bit more, there's known patches that can be applied that are provided by the OEM. And what I want to really emphasize here, the uniqueness of medical device cybersecurity patching, for instance, or any change requires the OEM to assess the change and validate that change doesn't change the form, fit, or function or safety performance of the device. So that's why there's a delay in getting patches that are available for, off-the-shelf OSs, for instance. So that's part of what needs to be done and working in the medical device world is collaborating with those OEMs to get that out. And in the case where there's not known fixes, it's really important to apply compensating controls or other risk mitigations, not remediations, because there's no remediation available in that case, such as network segmentation, take devices off the network, and employing other strategies within your hospital system or your ecosystem in general to reduce the risk profile. So I wanted to make sure I kind of laid that context, as you talked about who's responsible, that might help understand not only who's responsible and how you can determine that, but what's required to put in place a comprehensive system for cybersecurity in healthcare.
Is it your sense that these are issues present now and things that we're addressing, or is this more like a time bomb that we know is going to go off, but it's just a question of when?
Well, what I would say is there's good awareness, a great awareness, and folks I talk to are aware and working on addressing these known challenges. And I think what it comes down to is, it's the Pareto risk prioritization approach. How do we go after the right risks first? I would say as in any industry right now, and I'll use critical infrastructure because that really, people can relate to that, power systems, water treatment, those sorts of they're critical for a reason. They're high value targets, if you will, high profile targets. And so what I would say is healthcare is right at the top of the list as those, financial systems, government bodies, power grid, in terms of its profile for nefarious characters. And so it behooves the industry to continue to push the ball forward and do it from a risk-based approach. And I would say the susceptibility is probably no different than any of the others, or at least the profile for the targets. But the data is showing that healthcare is leading the pack in terms of attacks. I mentioned the reasons before, and I don't see any slowdown in that. And the data sources I'm looking at and consuming tend to indicate the same for the reasons I mentioned. There's a lot of value in it, both monetarily as well as from an impact, societal and cultural impact, I would say, as well as maybe where the maturity is across the industry in terms of its susceptibility.
All right, folks, let's hope we don't wind up on cybersecurity life support. Hey, Scott, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Sean Isom, who's an engineering manager for Adobe, and we're talking about WASM and what the use cases are going to be for what appears to be a whole new format or slash artifact for building the next generation of cloud native applications. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks. So excited for you to have me.
You guys are clearly pioneering this work, so you're one of the first companies to actually start building these applications. But I think everybody's kind of wondering, well, what kind of applications lend themselves to WASM in the first place? Because it's not like we have a shortage of artifacts. So what kinds of things should we look forward to?
That's a great question, right? And I think it requires a bit of a history lesson. If we look back at how Adobe and a lot of companies first started using WASM, it's solely on the browser side. So the use case was, let's find, and starting with things like Google's native client and then ASM.js and kind of moving towards that journey to WASM. It was all about, can we bring this desktop-like experience to a web browser, right? Can we build these rich, full-featured applications in a web browser? And so, I think that's kind of culminated recently. I think it was late 2021, Adobe announced the beta of Photoshop on the web. And so, but that was kind of 10 years in the making with little things like we worked on a product called Spark and Lightroom and all these other things that were on that journey to the web to where the technology is finally at a point that it's like, yes, we can definitively say we can make these rich web applications in WebAssembly. So now looking at me and my role, I represent kind of the back end side of the business, right? All of our back end cloud services that power these kinds of applications. Right now, Adobe is very heavily invested in Kubernetes, like most SaaS companies, as their orchestration platform of choice. But having seen some of the, let's say, speed, performance benefits, the low cost security by default model that comes with WASM, we start to look at, is there a better or alternative runtime for server-side applications where we can get some of these same benefits we had on the client side as well? So that's kind of where our thinking has been heading along this journey.
Are these applications going to be very enterprise heavy in the sense that they use databases, or are they going to be more like lightweight applets or stuff that we initially used that kind of felt more like serverless frameworks and stuff that will be just a little simpler to create than maybe what we're using with serverless today? Because one of the issues with serverless is the amount of time it takes to spin up a container kind of results in some, shall we say, some latency issues.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's one of the reasons, like if you look at Adobe service landscape, I mean, we do some serverless technologies, but we're still very heavily, very strong majority invested in Docker on the server side, right? Like, or containers, if you will, on the server side within Kubernetes. And a lot of the issues with serverless are kind of twofold. One is the application architecture shift of like, I'm used to building a somewhat more stateful, maybe microservice, right? But it's something that it's like a container wrapped around a Java process. It's multi-threaded. It's a little bit more heavyweight, right? And so to move from that model to like more of a function as a service kind of model where you've got to plug it together, you've got to plug your connection points with things like queues, distributed message queues for messaging, that it's a shift in application development. So that's one thing. And to your second point, absolutely, when you need something to run a serverless function, you have the cold start problem, right? Where you have to run backing Docker containers, you have to have backing infrastructure. And I mean, like, if you look at cloud vendors, they've got solutions to this, but they're fairly bespoke, right? There are ways to, like, for example, keep AWS Lambdas, kind of pre-wormed or kind of alive, or even when we run some OpenWhisk stuff internally, we have some internal tools for that as well. But WASM really helps solve that problem, right? When you are going on more of the serverless route, because it's such an instantaneous startup time, right? Scheduling can be a challenge, especially within the context of Kubernetes. But what you're looking at with, some of more of these PaaS options and, things like Cosmonic, well, just with WASM Cloud, the open source offering, which is what we've experimented with, largely the scheduling experience is solved, and it's very easy and fast to spin up these kinds of actors to service requests.
Now, we've been talking about the desire, at least, to write once and run anywhere for 30 years or so now, maybe more, depending on how you want to count. So as my kids often say when in the back of the car, are we there yet?
We are on the right road, but are we there yet? No. I mean, I think WASM outside of the browser is an extremely promising technology, but it is still early stage, right? And you see this, with standardization efforts like WASI, they're like hugely good faith efforts to get the standards right from the beginning, right? But also, we're not necessarily to the point where WASI has all of those features we need to just be like, oh, we're going to suddenly shift from this paradigm to this paradigm of application development, right? So, personally, having worked with WASM a little bit on the client side, seen the power of it, working on out of browser use cases now, like I see the raw power in it, but I also acknowledge that there's a lot of innovation left to happen to make it this kind of comprehensive end-to-end solution for application development that can really serve that use case of write once, run anywhere.
And you guys are also working with Cosmonic, which has led some of the development work on the backend platform. They have a PaaS now on top of their WASM Cloud, which is kind of a standard runtime that's open source. But how did you get involved with Cosmonic, and what's the value add?
Long story, I'll make it short. Basically, Taylor Thomas, who now works at Cosmonic, he was an engineer at Microsoft, working with Matt Butcher, the creator of Helm. They're part of like the DACE Labs group that came into Microsoft and, kind of was working on some of their Azure open source offerings. They wrote a tool called Crustlet, which was a Kubernetes kubelet to run Rust code. And kind of the real goal of it was to be able to run WASMs inside Kubernetes. So we started collaborating with them over a year ago, maybe even like a year and a half now, to say, basically just as a POC, we saw the blog post, like, can we run WASMs in Kubernetes? Fast forward and Matt went off and founded Fermion. Taylor's at Cosmonic. I think he's working on customer engineering there. And so that was kind of the natural next step as we explored WASM Cloud. We explored, I think one of my colleagues, Colin Murphy, who works on this stuff as well, ported an application from Document Cloud that just does background removal of signatures, right? So someone signs a PDF, for example, and makes that background behind the signature transparent. He stripped it out of a Java container, ported it to Rust, and then basically built it to WebAssembly and did an internal demo. I think we've shared a little bit publicly as well, where it was like, I've got the same code running in my browser, running on WASM Cloud, and running in Kubernetes as it is today. And here's kind of the strengths and weaknesses of each approach. So that was kind of this aha moment where we said, well, we've taken this one function of an application off. Now can we run WASM Cloud inside our Kubernetes clusters, right? So we're still reusing some of the infrastructure, just bootstrapped within a namespace. Can we actually take a full microservice and, right now it involves porting it to Rust. Long term, I don't think that's going to be the case, but take a full microservice and basically like translate it into something that's going to run well in WASM Cloud. And that's kind of like where we're at with our experiments right now. I think we've done the work. We have a service working in WASM Cloud. There are, inside our Kubernetes cluster, there are some feature gaps with WASI that's kind of necessary to really get it to that full end-to-end experience. But we're close on some of those, and I think that's going to expand it to a lot more services going forward.
One of the issues that comes up with folks is that, and maybe they don't appreciate as much, is it appears that WASM is fundamentally more secure than some of the previous artifacts that are out there, in the sense that today we kind of build software, it's loosely coupled, and that enables malware to move across. So are there going to be some interesting implications for security of our software supply chains as we go forward, as we start to build stuff in WASM?
I think so. And what attracts me to WASM security is it is a secure by default model, right? When you look at, like, for example, what Adobe does in Kubernetes right now, we run fully multi-tenant code within Kubernetes, which means we have to do namespace level isolation. We use Cilium to block communication outwards and inwards, across what we call untrusted workloads within a cluster, right? So obviously it's still early days for like an apples to apples, full comprehensive security analysis between the two models, but just the model of saying, I can run code, I can, AOT code to essentially native code within WASM, but also it's secure by default because it doesn't have access to any system resources without that kind of like overhead of forcing, security, with it just being able to run safely by the virtue of it not having access to system resources. I do think that this is going to have a lot of implications because with secure by default, you kind of also get performance by default as well. So you don't really have to worry as much about the like, how am I going to retrofit this and prevent security issues? And even like, now I'm ranting a little bit, but one of the visions from Cosmonic and WASM Cloud is like the actor and provider model, right? And that is where you can separate your business logic, which is the actor, from the raw provider, which is some system capability. Let's say, like I need to store something to S3, right? I need to write to a database, for example. And through that separation, you're also decoupling your business logic from the underlying library. So right now, if this were a Docker container, you would have to, rebuild your code base using this new library version and wrap it in a new container, deploy it out to production, all that. When you look at some of these WebAssembly frameworks, because they're just building blocks, in theory, you can pull out, like if there's a CVE in some, library you're using for a database, for example, unplug it, plug it in. The actor, your code never recompiles. It's the same. It's just binary compatible with that module. So, anyways, to summarize, like it again, early days, common theme, but the secure by default model and the decoupling of the components gives us a lot more flexibility within the WASM use case.
What do you think the implications are for DevOps teams going forward? Because there is this kind of new artifact that, for all intents and purposes, it's a new animal in the zoo, but will this make their lives easier ultimately or harder, or what do you think?
I think it's going to follow a lot of the typical technology adoption curve, right? Right now, with it being early stage, you've got kind of the, what is Liam called them? The well-intentioned seditionists within, existing DevOps orgs and companies that are pushing for these kinds of technologies who, really kind of have to become almost domain experts in the area, right? To understand how to build, interact with these modules and integrate them into their infrastructure. I think over time, there's really a case for a better together story, right? Where it's not like WASM is the only runtime for everything, just like containers shouldn't be the only runtime for everything. But as the tooling, standardizes and improves, as kind of the, developers are up leveled from knowing more about the internals of WebAssembly to, just being able to compose and write applications easily. I think the implications for actual DevOps teams is if we can have this better together model where we can run WebAssembly in Kubernetes, or at least in some sort of compatible way with Kubernetes, there isn't that high of a bar for learning these new technologies, right? It's just yet another CRD in Kubernetes, for example.
All right. So what's your best advice for folks who are thinking about getting started down this path? What should they be on the lookout for, or, simply, do I just put everybody in a room and let them experiment, or how do I get this thing going?
Well, that's what I've been doing this week. I'm at KubeCon this week. We had WASM Day a couple days ago. There was, I think, 70 people in a room talking WASM all day, which was awesome. But obviously, that doesn't scale, right, to everyone who wants to play with these technologies. I think in its current state, learning some basic Rust is kind of a necessity. And it's not because Rust is the only language that can build the WebAssembly, but it's just so much of the tooling in the ecosystem is centered around Rust, because Rust can build WASI targets or WASM32 targets by default. That's kind of a place, to get started. And then also just following WASI, right? Like you don't need to go to standardization groups, but just, like looking at the proposals in the GitHub repo, maybe subscribing to some notifications, just, setting a Google search alert or something. I think I can't articulate how important WASI and the component model are to the future of WebAssembly. So as those things gain traction over the next, let's say 6 to 12 months, I think that's going to make it really easy to start, instead of working with these little Lego blocks, being able to take whole application models and use them in WebAssembly.
All right, folks. Well, just when you thought you knew what cloud native meant, along comes WASM, and we're going to have some more diverse choices to work with as we build the next generation of applications. Sean, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right, and back to you guys in the studio.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had some amazing interviews with industry professionals to give you the latest in the tech world. And alongside our extensive conference coverage and premiere of the 3rd episode of Engineering the Change, we had plenty of great content today. We'll be back again on Monday, so we hope to see you then. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Tech strong.